Meet our main character, Logan McLean, the firstborn son of a noble house that's drowning in debt. Back at the manor, the staff practically trembled whenever he walked by, and honestly, can you blame them? Just one look at his face tells you everything. The guy radiates pure, chaotic energy. Anyway, one afternoon, Logan decides to pay his father a visit over at the main castle. Except the guards at the gate weren't having it. They formed a wall, completely stonewalling him. Their reason was just savage. They declared he wasn't worthy. In their eyes, he was a total nobody, just the forgotten son of the Baron's first wife. See, around the castle, Logan's reputation was trash. You either feared him or despised him. And to be fair, he'd earned it by being an arrogant, insufferable jerk. But the Logan standing before them now? He wasn't the same guy. Everything was about to change. Pushed to his limit by the guard's smug attitude, Logan's hand disappeared inside his coat, emerging with a pair of leather gloves. He didn't just drop them, he smacked them right across the guard's face. A total power move in front of everyone. An act like that could only mean one thing. This was a formal challenge, a duel. But Logan wasn't done twisting the knife. He leaned in and verbally dismantled the guard, saying that the only real failure standing here was a washed-up, second-rate soldier like him. Dominion absolutely snapped. Blinded by pure rage, he accepted the challenge. Without another word, they marched toward the dueling grounds, agreeing on the terms, wooden swords. But here's the catch. A knight can still channel their aura through a wooden blade. A skilled knight could still land a fatal blow on a weaker opponent. The entire crowd thought they were about to watch their prince get bodied. In their minds, Logan was a certified scrub. Dominion didn't hold back, lunging forward and channeling his aura into a devastating overhead swing. But Logan moved with impossible speed, ducking under the blow with surgical precision and slamming his own blade down onto Dominion's. The force of the impact was so brutal, it ripped the sword from the guard's grip, sending it clattering to the ground. He was disarmed in one clean shot. The entire arena went dead silent. A wave of shocked whispers followed. How could the family disgrace, Logan, possibly pull off a move like that? Logan wasn't finished. He offered Dominion another round if he was up for it, but the soldier was just kneeling there, stunned. He just stared at his trembling hand. There was no denying it, the force behind that hit was monstrous. Logan didn't bother waiting for a reply. He moved in, delivering a flurry of precise strikes with the wooden sword, every single one, a message for the earlier disrespect. When the dust settled, the castle guards were completely rattled. Prince Logan was no longer the pushover they all remembered. And the secret behind this sudden transformation? It was a story none of them could ever comprehend. The truth is, this Logan came from the future. In another timeline, at 40 years old, Logan was just a low-ranking grunt on the battlefield. His noble house was nothing but ash and a painful memory. The other soldiers relentlessly clowned on him, mostly because of a failure from his youth. He'd once been defeated in a duel by his own little brother. They couldn't figure out why this disgraced noble was even in the army, after his entire bloodline had been erased. A great betrayal had left the kingdom vulnerable, and enemy armies poured through the gates. Every soldier fought like a cornered animal, Logan included, but it was hopeless. The kingdom fell. In the end, they were all annihilated. Logan himself bled out on that muddy battlefield, and as the world went dark, he was consumed by a crushing weight of regret. He was haunted by a lifetime of terrible choices and the memory of the absolute monster he used to be. But more than anything, all he wanted was a chance to ask his father for forgiveness. And in the next instant, Logan's eyes shot open. He was back in his old bedroom, his heart pounding in his chest. His head was aching from an injury he'd sustained during that fateful duel with his younger brother. And then, the impossible reality crashed down on him. Our hero could barely process it. Had his entire future life been nothing but a horrible nightmare? No, it felt way too real. He could recall every single agonizing detail. Stumbling to the window, his eyes fell upon the familiar sight of his family's estate, the home of his youth. A short time later, his younger brother, Ronan, cautiously entered the room, visibly bracing himself for the usual dose of cruelty from Logan. The poor kid was trembling, which made perfect sense. The old Logan had been a tyrant to everyone, but he reserved a special kind of cruelty for Ronan. Logan remembered the last time he'd treated him like dirt, the very moment that had shattered their bond. It was the reason Ronan had learned to stay away. A fresh wave of guilt made Logan's head spin. All this time, Ronan had actually looked up to his older brother, but the household staff knew Logan's toxic reputation. Rick, the family butler, immediately tried to usher young Ronan out of the room for his own safety. But instead of the usual explosion of anger, Logan spoke with a quiet gentleness no one had ever heard from him before, asking Ronan to come here. Ronan was completely frozen. So was Rick, the butler, who just thought his master was having some kind of episode. Logan searched for the words to praise Ronan's skill, but they got caught in his throat. He knew that after years of being a complete monster, a few simple words would mean nothing. So instead, Logan did something he'd never done before. He pulled his little brother into a hug, He begged for forgiveness, admitting he had been a truly awful brother. He confessed that Ronan was the amazing one. There wasn't a single person in that room who wasn't crying. After they talked for a bit, Ronan finally left, leaving Logan to his thoughts. Our hero gazed out the window once more, now absolutely certain. This was his second chance. He was back in time, and this time, things were going to be different. This time, he would save his family. A maid stumbles into the room by mistake, freezing on the spot before stammering out an apology. Rick, another servant, practically dives in after her, apologizing profusely, swearing on her behalf that Mary didn't mean to intrude. The whole vibe was just exhausting, and it hits Logan just how absurd this is, the way they cower in his presence. He can't help but wonder, damn, just how much of a monster was I? Logan dismisses the incident, simply asking them to bring him some paper and pens. Rick and Mary exchange a look of pure panic, as if wondering if the tyrant young master was actually about to do work. When they rush back with the supplies, Logan actually thanks them. Rick just stops, completely floored by the words. A thank you? The servants felt like they were in some bizarro alternate universe. Once more, the reality of what a complete piece of trash he'd been slammed into him. He waved them off, needing to be alone to work. But before starting, a critical memory surfaced. The war against the Empire was only 10 years away, and that war is what would ultimately annihilate his family, because they'd be fractured and buried in debt. His new mission was crystal clear. He wasn't just fixing his own garbage personality, he was rewriting his family's entire destiny. To make matters worse, an internal war was set to explode in his own region in just 1 year. That was the first domino that would topple his family's legacy. After scribbling furiously for hours, filling page after page, Logan finally decided it was time to confront his father. As he moved through the mansion, he saw the staff literally turn their faces away from him, darting their eyes away as if by pure instinct. They were convinced Logan could snuff out their lives with a single thought, and that raw terror was practically branded onto their souls. In the chaos, a maid hauling a stack of clean laundry was completely oblivious as she rounded a corner and tripped, spilling everything across the ground. The girl froze solid. In her mind, this was it. Her life was forfeit. But that's not what went down. Logan reached out a gentle hand and helped her back to her feet. For a second, it felt like some kind of divine intervention. Then the girl saw his face, that horrifying face she knew all too well. Logan wasn't known for compassion. She immediately started begging for her life before scrambling away, not even daring to glance back. Watching her bolt, Logan had a major realization. Just acting different wasn't going to be a quick fix. After all, he'd spent years walking around with the smile of a freaking murderer. By the time Logan reached his father's office and announced himself, his face was a mask of ice. It had been more than 20 years since he'd last laid eyes on his father. As expected, the temperature inside the room dropped 10 degrees. The patriarch of House McLean, Patrick McLean, had zero reason to show his deadbeat eldest son any respect. Logan cut right to the chase. He asked for permission to go into isolated training on the family's mountain property. Our hero still had all the knowledge from his past life, so he knew exactly how night training was supposed to work, but his current body was a useless, lazy sack of meat that had never seen a day of real work. On top of that, he needed money to flip his family's situation, and getting stronger was a fast track to that. He had to be prepared, because in 3 months, she would arrive. Patrick immediately fired back, accusing him of trying to run away after getting his butt kicked by Ronan. Logan shot that down. He owned up to it, admitting he was weak and that he'd completely squandered his life up to this point. He wanted to improve, but Patrick had heard this song and dance before. He shut the request down cold, telling Logan his problem was deeper than just a lack of trying. Logan saw that coming. He conceded that his trashy attitude had been his greatest weakness and swore he was determined to change. But his father wasn't buying it anymore and ordered him to get out. Request denied. This was the price for the life he had lived. Still, Logan didn't budge. He looked his father in the eye, admitting he'd been a fool and totally immature, and that this training would be his first real step toward becoming a man. Even the most jaded father can't completely write off his own son. Patrick finally cracked, telling him this was his absolute last chance. Before letting him go, he sneered, asking if Logan seriously thought 3 months was enough to even touch Ronan. Logan's answer was solid. The training wasn't about beating Ronan, it was about conquering himself. When Logan left the office, Patrick felt an emotion toward his son he hadn't experienced in a very long time. It was respect, and Logan sensed it. Though his father said nothing, Logan knew that transforming himself was the right call. Logan headed for the mountains and disappeared for 3 whole months. His mission wasn't just to build muscle, he was aiming for something legendary. True warriors could topple even dragons by unleashing the life force stored in their core. Day in and day out, Logan drove himself to the absolute brink of collapse. By the end of those 3 months, he forged his core a feat that took him until he was 40 years old in his previous life. With this power, he could push his body far beyond its breaking point. On the final day, Logan stood before a colossal tree and readied his strongest attack. He focused every last drop of his aura, channeling it into his sword and through his very soul. The strike was so devastating, it literally tore through the fabric of space before slicing its target in two. This was the endgame power from his last life, and somehow, he was unleashing it as a kid. But the blowback on his fragile body was immense. A technique like this was strictly a last-ditch, emergency-only move now. It was time to head back and start shaking things up for real, starting with his clothes. He reeked like a dumpster fire. But as Logan arrived home, eager to show his father his progress, a guard named Damien blocked his path at the gate. The guard sneered that only those with direct McLean blood could enter without clearance. In that instant, Logan knew his authority in his own damn house was crumbling. So right then and there, Logan challenged Damien to a duel, leaving every guard in the castle completely floored. He effortlessly wiped the floor with the trained soldier, a testament to his brutal training and real-world combat experience. The message was crystal clear. No other guard would ever pull a stunt like that again. Later, inside his father's study, Logan and Patrick met once more. Patrick conceded that what he saw was seriously impressive, acknowledging Logan had finally awakened his power, and demanded to know what went down during his training. Logan was stunned. His father had been spying on him, something he never would have predicted. He explained the truth. He'd simply let go of his ambitions, cleared his mind, and trained without greed. With that headspace, a new power began to surge within him. Internally, Logan knew that even if it sounded like total nonsense, this epiphany was a gift from his previous life. It was only after abandoning his quest for vengeance that he'd become a Force user back then, not awakening until he was over 40. Patrick was blown away that such a simple change in perspective could trigger this kind of evolution. He told Logan he was a completely different person now, but he was still royally pissed. After achieving a massive power-up, the very first thing Logan did was go and assault one of his knights. Logan shot back that the guy had it coming. He then challenged his father, asking if he'd even bothered to get the full story from the other soldiers. Patrick admitted he had, but still insisted the beatdown wasn't necessary. It absolutely was, Logan retorted, shocking his father. That knight had tried to deceive the heir of the house. He tried to play him for a fool. Letting that disrespect slide would be like letting poison seep into the family's command structure. Logan then thought about hierarchy. It's the absolute bedrock that keeps any group from falling apart. The moment that chain of command gets shaky, the entire organization starts to rot from the inside out. That was a hard lesson he'd learned over 10 years as a mercenary captain. When you're dealing with men who carry swords, you establish the pecking order with one single, decisive move. What happened today was a warning shot for every other knight on the roster. Patrick finally admitted that Damien was mostly to blame for failing his duty and trying to con Logan. Even so, he called Logan's move reckless and told him to dial it back in the future. Logan was floored by how quickly his father let it go, especially compared to the iron-fisted man from his past life. Seeing the look on his son's face, Patrick actually cracked a joke, asking if he'd prefer a punishment instead. Logan quickly replied that he was good. Patrick wrapped things up, saying he still didn't condone Logan's actions. He warned him to never pull a move like that again without his say-so, especially since Logan hadn't even been officially knighted. Yet, Logan respectfully promised he would keep that in mind. Not long after, Logan's father dropped a bombshell. His fiancée, Rena, would be arriving for a visit very soon. At first, Logan looked completely blindsided by the announcement, but it wasn't shock. Oh no, it was pure, unfiltered hype. His payday was finally rolling in, right on schedule. Princess Rena Wolves was formally introduced. A hush fell over the room as every lady present was absolutely captivated by her beauty. Every single guard felt a sharp pang of jealousy toward Logan. As Rena moved forward, she gracefully greeted Lord McLean. She mentioned it had been far too long and politely inquired about his health. Patrick McLean, momentarily dazzled by her presence, remarked on what a stunning young woman she'd become since their last meeting. Rick, watching from the sidelines, was also visibly impressed by her newfound maturity. But when he glanced over at Master Logan, the kid looked completely and utterly unfazed. Rena then announced she carried a letter from her father, the Count, and she began to read it for everyone to hear. The letter was addressed to Baron Patrick McLean, and it was a total snooze fest. For the next 30 minutes, even the guards were fighting to stay upright, but the final lines snapped the entire hall back to attention. The last request was a gut punch. Due to unavoidable circumstances, the arranged marriage between Rena and Logan was to be officially called off. After she finished, Logan instantly decoded the real message. The Wolves clan had been betting on Patrick McLean to level up into a powerful aura master, but he'd been stuck as a high-tier knight for 20 years, and to top it off, his son Logan was seen as an absolute scrub. For the ambitious Wolves clan, merging with the McLeans was now a bad deal, so they were cutting their losses and bailing. Patrick was seething. To break an engagement over such flimsy excuses was a straight-up slap in the face. He knew immediately this wasn't just a breakup. The wolves were trying to publicly humiliate his entire house. Rena denied it. She claimed she personally volunteered to be the messenger precisely because she was afraid Patrick would take it the wrong way. She insisted on settling this in person, spinning a tale about her flawless, picture-perfect memories of her year at the McLean estate. As a little girl, she reminisced about the serene days, the stunning landscapes, and all the sweet moments she had with Logan. She claimed those memories were everything to her, that she never wanted to lose them, but she was just a puppet bound to her family's decree, forced to bow to her elders. The only thing left was for her to appear in the flesh and beg for forgiveness from both Logan and Patrick. The room was totally buying it, whispering about how she was an angel inside and out, everyone except for Logan, his stepmother Mary, and his father, Patrick. Mary cut right through the act, demanding to know the real tea behind the split. She wanted to know what these so-called unavoidable circumstances actually were. Logan glanced at his stepmom, Ronian's biological mother, who had always seen him as a rival for the family inheritance. He was floored that she was stepping in for him, but he guessed protecting the family's rep was a completely different story. Rena just apologized again, completely dodging the question by claiming total ignorance of the real reasons. She played the victim, explaining that since her only purpose was to be married off, her father never looped her in on anything important. Mary absolutely lost it, concluding that this was the real reason Rena had the nerve to show up and call things off, without a single legitimate excuse. Rena looked utterly terrified, her pristine white dress now stained with makeup that was melting in her sweat, and she looked up at the McLeans with a bombshell announcement. To make up for the trouble, the Wolf Clan was offering a payment of 3 million gold pieces. The McLeans' financial manager, Dwayne Filsner, almost had a coronary right then and there. Logan, meanwhile, was buzzing. He thought he was about to get paid, but not a chance. Patrick absolutely erupted, roaring about how she could dare to propose such a disgusting insult. In an instant, a knight from the Wolf House was in front of Rena, shielding her and pleading for Patrick to chill out. Patrick sized him up, questioning if the knight was a high-ranking warrior like himself, and admitted it was damn impressive for someone so young. He went on, musing that maybe carving up the Wolf family's rising star would be fair payment for the shame they'd brought upon the McLeans. The knight shot back that his master, Kieran Wolves, viewed Lord McLean as a man of principle and would never make a move on the young princess or anyone else beneath him. Rena then piped up, claiming she didn't want to put a price on their honor either. She begged them to see the gold as a genuine token of goodwill to keep the peace between their houses. Patrick just gritted his teeth. He knew if he pressed any harder, he'd be the one losing face. He saw the game clear as day. This was precisely why Kieran sent kids to do his dirty work. Patrick declared that a guest is a guest, even a cursed one, and that House McLean would never bring harm to them. But he flat out rejected the Wolf Clan's insulting, one-sided deal. House McLean demanded just one thing. Princess Rena Wolf had to personally deliver a sincere apology to Logan. Patrick made it crystal clear that no other form of compensation would be accepted. But right at that moment, Logan, the guy at the center of it all, stepped forward. He announced he had a request of his own. Internally, Logan was screaming that they had to take the money. Letting them walk away with just an "I'm sorry" was certifiably insane. 3 million gold was the entire annual budget for House McLean. Half their liquid assets came directly from his stepmother's family. And if they pulled that funding, the McLeans would go bankrupt overnight. And all for what? Pride? As far as Logan was concerned, everyone in the room had lost their minds. Logan looked his father in the eye and said he wanted to accept the Wolves' offer. Patrick was furious all over again, demanding if Logan was trying to make him eat his own words. Logan thought about the crushing weight on his father's shoulders. Even without an aura, Patrick was a high-ranking knight, but that title meant next to nothing against the real power players in the kingdom. If Logan couldn't navigate this crisis, he'd never get anywhere in life. Patrick shot back that House McLean was not so desperate that it would sell its honor for cash. Logan let out a heavy sigh and replied that they were, in fact, exactly that poor. He then dropped the truth bomb. House McLean was already 3 million gold pieces in debt to the bank. The annual interest payment alone was 150,000 gold. If it weren't for Kuros's money, they would have collapsed ages ago. They were the kingdom's most prestigious family of beggars. And on top of all that, they owed more than 2 million gold to the very kingdom they served. He argued that settling for just an apology would only fuel rumors that they had caved and bent the knee to the Wolves. Rena tried to cut in, claiming the Wolves clan wasn't unreasonable and that they deeply respected House McLean's honor. Logan immediately shut her down, asking if she honestly thought unilaterally blowing up their engagement was a rational move. A vivid memory from Logan's past life suddenly slammed into him. In that timeline, he had actually believed Rena was genuinely heartbroken over their breakup, but that entire fantasy was annihilated after one single incident. He remembered being in a bedroom with her, completely alone. Rena was thanking him for coming, and then she said that even if their story ended that day, she wanted to make one final, unforgettable memory together. Logan, convinced his future as a noble, was totally cooked. He'd pleaded with her to run away with him, to escape that very night. Her answer? A blade hurled at his face, forcing him to whip out his own sword just to keep from being scarred. In the next instant, Rena was ripping her own dress to shreds, spitting venom about how someone like him could ever think he deserved her. She absolutely ridiculed him. She sneered at him to know his place, then twisted the knife by asking why he even bothered carrying a sword when he'd just lost to a kid. As a thunderstorm cracked open the sky, she unleashed a blood-curdling scream, accusing Logan of trying to force himself on her. And with his sword already in his hand, the lie was terrifyingly easy to sell. Logan's mind flashed back to all the other times he'd been the scapegoat, to the point where even his own blood wouldn't take his side. In the end, House McClane was crushed into apologizing to the wolves, coughing up a massive sum in compensation. Rena was the reason Logan swore off trusting women forever. To him, she was nothing more than a gutter snake, and he made a silent vow that this time around, she wouldn't escape the consequences. With that bitter memory resurfacing, Logan's entire strategy shifted. His original plan was to slowly claw back his reputation, to prove to everyone he was a changed man. But the raw fury of his duel with Damien had sparked a critical revelation. The soldiers turned a blind eye when he was disrespected, and whispers of his humiliating loss to his brother had already poisoned the well while he was away. You don't rebuild a family by trying to win over weak-willed yes-men. With the regional war just 9 short months away, his reputation was worthless. Saving his family was everything. Choking down his pride, Logan declared to Rena that he would accept the Wolves clan's compensation. He was even willing to defy his own house to do it. Rena was floored. Patrick erupted like a volcano, demanding how Logan dared to challenge his authority. But Logan's voice was ice as he replied that he wasn't interested in their hollow apologies, a statement that left his father utterly stunned. Words were just air, and an honor built on nothing but promises was just as fragile. Rena desperately tried to regain control of the situation, claiming the Wolf clan only wanted to follow the Baron's judgment and pushing Patrick to make a choice. Logan saw right through her pathetic performance. She was desperately trying to shield her father's reputation and was probably sweating bullets at the thought of actually paying out 3 million gold. Patrick stared down at Rena, his voice booming as he proclaimed that, as the Lord of House McClane, he would only accept a genuine apology. The twist? He was leaving it entirely up to Logan to determine if that apology was sincere. Mary's face contorted with rage. Patrick shot Logan a warning look, reminding him that taking blood money for a bruised ego would set a dangerous precedent, making honor something that could be bought and sold. Logan didn't even flinch. As the person whose life was directly torpedoed by the broken engagement, he formally accepted the compensation offered by the Wolves clan. The decision sent shockwaves through the room, hitting Mary hard and making Rena's face turn pale. Patrick's disappointment was a palpable thing. He sighed that he thought Logan had grown, but instead, he'd just decayed into something worse. He took the blame, saying he'd failed to instill in him the true meaning of honor. Logan remained silent, but a storm of conviction raged in his mind. Every single thing he was doing was to protect his family. Later, back in the solitude of his room, the hefty payment from Rena Wolves now in his possession, a sharp knock echoed off the door. Thinking it was just Rick, he casually called for them to enter. But it wasn't Rick. It was Dwayne, the family's financial manager, who strode in. The second Logan saw him, his internal alarms started blaring. He knew this man was scheming something. Meanwhile, a frantic calculation was running through Dwayne's head. As the man in charge of House McClane's finances, he'd been forced to juggle the entire estate's needs, on a budget that seemed to evaporate a little more each year. He was trapped between soldiers who were always screaming for superior gear, and servants who were desperately trying to stockpile enough food to not freeze to death in the winter. To patch the ever-widening holes in their finances, Dwayne spent his days groveling before the patriarchs for more funds. Sometimes, he had to wonder if he was a financial advisor or the world's most glorified beggar. He'd often fantasized about quitting, telling himself if this wasn't the town he grew up in, he would have been gone years ago. But today was a new dawn. With that 3 million gold, he could finally stop hyperventilating for a few years. The only thing standing between him and that sweet relief was the moron sitting in front of him. In his head, it was a given that Logan would have to fork over a huge chunk of that 3 million. Dwayne plastered on his most charming smile and told Logan he was just dropping by to offer his greetings after his truly masterful performance the day before. The way Logan stood his ground, refusing to buckle under immense pressure from outsiders. It proved he was a brilliant prodigy, the true heir House McClane deserved. As Dwayne laid the praise on thick, he pictured the compliments sinking deep into Logan's soul. After all, this was the screw-up kid who'd never heard a single good word in his life. Getting that money off him was going to be child's play. But Logan's expression didn't change one bit. Dwayne pressed on, saying that in these desperate times, 3 million gold was like a monsoon in a barren desert. He gushed about how Logan's brilliant move had given the entire family a new lease on life. Logan's face remained a mask of indifference as he replied, "I fail to see how the family is breathing any easier. That money belongs to me." Hearing those words, Dwayne felt the floor drop out from under him. The kid was actually planning to hoard every last coin. Still, he forced himself to maintain his composure. After 20 years as the McLean's financial advisor, swallowing his own damn pride was practically a reflex, and this encounter was playing out the exact same way, until suddenly, the man just broke down, tears streaming down his face. The reaction completely sideswiped Logan. He had to ask, was the family's situation really that dire? Dwayne, choking back sobs, explained that House McLean was drowning in a crippling 3 million gold debt to Cooper Bank. He tried to go on, stammering that the interest alone was a staggering 150,000 gold a year, but Logan cut him off mid-sentence, finishing the calculation himself. Dwayne just froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. He stammered, asking how Logan could possibly know. Logan just shrugged, saying the interest shouldn't be a problem. After all, it was harvest season. The profits from the harvest would easily handle it. But Dwayne frantically shook his head, desperate to make him understand that just keeping the barony afloat burned through an insane amount of cash. The family was constantly running on fumes, their budget stretched to its absolute breaking point. He pleaded that even a tiny bit of help would change everything, but Logan shut him down, cold. He made it crystal clear he wasn't interested in the excuses. Completely baffled, Dwayne demanded to know why Logan wouldn't help, especially after he just defied the Baron. For the family's sake, Logan agreed with him. He declared he would use the money to secure the family's future, not to bail out the Baron's current mess. Instead, he needed that capital to prepare for what was coming. A silent fury boiled up inside Dwayne. He thought Logan had no clue what he was talking about, and should just cough up the money right now. But Logan, completely unfazed, calmly posed a question. He asked if wiping the slate clean, paying off all that debt, would actually solve the root problem. Dwayne shot back that a larger budget would at least make running the estate manageable for a few years. Logan pressed him, asking what would happen after that. Even if their fortunes turned around temporarily, they would inevitably sink back into the red, because House McLean had no signature products to sell. It was a death spiral, and Logan was dead set on shattering it with a plan of his own. And for that, he needed every single coin. Dwayne was just floored. He wondered if this was really the same young master he had always known. He had always seen Logan as some reckless punk, the one who never gave a damn about the family business. That's when Logan dropped a proposal. If Dwayne were to help him, Logan hinted he might even slide a portion of the cash over to ease some of the family's financial strain. Dwayne's ears perked up instantly, asking what he needed. Logan's answer was chillingly simple. He needed to assemble a crew of mercenaries. Later, Logan was deep in conversation with Rick. He had that look again, the one that meant he was about to disappear, and Rick immediately blew up, demanding to know where the hell he thought he was going now. It hadn't even been that long since Logan had resurfaced from his solitary training. Logan replied flatly that he was leaving to make more money. Rick pointed out that Logan was already sitting on a massive fortune, but Logan shot back that it wasn't nearly enough. He knew the Patriarch would never sign off on him leaving, especially with the tense atmosphere hanging over the castle. But Logan had zero intention of asking for permission. He was just going to slip away in the dead of night. Rick was stunned, but Logan was unfazed. He knew if he couldn't rewrite his reputation now, he never would. That meant he had to build his power base outside the family's shadow. Fortunately for him, he knew precisely what was going down beyond the estate walls, an exact mirror of his past life after he'd been kicked to the curb. He already knew the first person he had to track down. Rick desperately tried to talk some sense into him, arguing that he wasn't thinking straight and that becoming a fugitive at this moment would only pour gasoline on the fire. Logan's patience was wearing thin with Rick's constant objections. Rick pressed him, asking what his grand plan was if he just ran off. He even declared that if Logan was truly going to leave, he'd have to get through him first. Logan was dangerously close to taking him up on that offer. Seeing the genuine fear in Rick's eyes, Logan reassured him, saying it would all be fine. He would leave a letter for his father, so that all the blame wouldn't fall on Rick. Rick asked what on earth he planned to write, but Logan just offered a cryptic smile. Rick finally let out a shaky breath of relief. After Logan vanished into the night, Rick delivered the sealed letter to the Patriarch, who looked like he was about to unleash an apocalypse. The letter opened with a ridiculously formal greeting before explaining that, heartbroken over the broken engagement, I have decided to leave for some fresh air, but will return soon. Signed by Logan McLean. After that, all Rick could do was cry, praying for the young master to return safely. A history of the McLean family then unfolds, revealing that a mere 200 years ago, the family name wasn't the joke it is today. Back then, Their influence stretched deep into neighboring counties, and they were revered as the undisputed rulers of the entire southwest region of the Kingdom of Grandia. However, under the current lord, Patrick McLean, the absolute incompetence of the last 3 generations had dragged the family's name through the mud. Their noble title was downgraded, and their territory was carved up and shrunk dramatically. The legendary grain depot, known as the McLean Plains, was surrendered to a powerful vassal, and their most fertile lands were seized and redistributed. The territory the McLeans were left with was basically an exile sentence, a patch of dry, barren earth near the southern mountains. It was as if they'd been completely cut off. From that moment, financial ruin wasn't just likely, it was inevitable. Their lands produced nothing of value, and unlike other mountain territories, they didn't even have the luck of a single copper mine. Logan knew that even if they miraculously won the coming regional war, they'd just end up crawling back to Kiros for handouts. To escape this crushing cycle, he needed a ridiculous amount of cash, way more than the 3 million gold he had stashed away. But he knew a guy who could make it happen. As Logan stepped into Cairo, the bustling commercial heart of the Grandia Kingdom, the city exploded with noise. Merchants hawked their wares, gleaming rings, sturdy shields, and piles of fresh fruit and vegetables. The sheer energy of the place hammered home just how remote and pathetic the McLean barony really was. His memories told him the man he was searching for grew up in Cairo, and the word on the street was he still lurked somewhere nearby. This man was a legend known as the Golden Beetle, Philip Claude, a major player in the Ares Empire, the undisputed powerhouse of the continent. The empire was a true meritocracy, a centralized machine where raw talent, regardless of age or gender, was your ticket to the top. Even foreigners could climb the ladder to insane power and wealth. Philip Claude, born right here in Grandia, was the poster child for it. He clawed his way up to become one of the wealthiest merchants in the empire, and the single largest arms dealer on the entire continent. To most, he was a sellout, a traitor to his own kingdom. But the truth was, despite the flashy Golden Beetle nickname, Philip had been secretly bankrolling people from his homeland, using his fortune to fund the miracle of Grandia's continued independence. As Logan navigated the chaotic streets, he spotted a young man, just standing frozen in the middle of the road. Could that be him? The kid looked like he'd just been played for a fool, staring into nothingness, clearly trying to figure out how he was going to survive without a single cent to his name. Logan knew the stories that Philip's empire crumbled, because he got scammed, but seeing it in person was gut-wrenching. The kid looked like he was completely spiraling. He even looked like he was considering ending it all. Logan moved in, trying to break the spell, and asked if he was Philip Claude. Philip snapped to attention, confirming his name with a suspicious glare, and demanded to know who Logan was. From Logan's crimson eyes, intense stare, and road-weary armor, Philip instantly pegged him as trouble. Logan just said he wanted a minute of his time, but Philip wasn't buying it. He demanded to know how a stranger could possibly know his name. In that instant, Philip saw it in Logan's eyes, a look he'd seen 1,000 times. Greed. His mind raced, putting the pieces together. This guy in dented armor, showing up at the worst possible moment? He had to be some hired muscle. Logan tried to get a word in, but Philip totally freaked, yelling that the payment deadline hadn't even hit yet. He screamed that the deal for his commercial property would be finalized in 3 days, and told Logan to just come back then. Logan calmly assured him he wasn't there to collect a debt, but Philip was like a cornered animal, just shouting that none of his sales had closed and ordering Logan to get lost. Logan tried again to de-escalate, insisting he wasn't there to take money, but to invest. That one word stopped Philip cold. He asked if Logan was for real. Logan simply confirmed it. Philip's brain short-circuited. If this dude wasn't a debt collector, he had to be completely insane to want to invest in a guy who was a total failure. And yet, a tiny sliver of hope made him wonder if it could actually be true. He skeptically asked how much Logan was planning to invest. Logan flipped the question right back, asking how much Philip needed. He promised to wipe the slate clean, clear all his debts, and get him back in the game. But Philip's suspicion flared up again as he scanned Logan's face and his dirt-caked armor. This guy had clearly traveled a hell of a long way. When Logan pushed again for a number, Philip finally snapped, calling him a disgusting con artist. He accused Logan of trying to swindle him, just like everyone else. He spat that Logan was no investor, pointing to the crest on his armor. That insignia marked him as one of the McLeans from the southwest. And to Philip, the McLeans were nothing but professional beggars, mooching off their wealthy relatives. How could a family that couldn't even cover its own bills possibly have money to invest? He warned Logan that impersonating nobility was a death sentence and griped that he'd picked the wrong mark, since he was officially flat broke. Logan remained cool, analyzing the outburst. Even at absolute rock bottom, Philip's mind was still razor sharp, exactly what he'd expect from a future business magnate. Now, how to shut him up while he was having a meltdown in the street, wailing that he didn't have enough money to eat, let alone afford a proper death? Then, an idea clicked. Logan told him to watch closely and unleashed his force aura. Philip was absolutely floored. A guy who could awaken his force this young wouldn't throw his life away on some cheap scam. He immediately started apologizing, admitting that everything that had happened lately had him on edge and way too paranoid. He asked what Logan truly wanted. Logan laid it out plain and simple. He wanted to hire him, permanently, and as a signing bonus, he'd pay off every single one of his debts. The suspicion returned to Philip's eyes as he asked if the McLean family actually had that kind of coin. So Logan just casually asks about the debt, guessing it's around 250,000 gold, and says he'll just wipe it clean. Not only that, but he offers to throw in another 300,000 gold right on top. Then, he unveils a mountain of cash he had on him the whole time. Philip just gawked at Logan, like he was staring at a literal angel descending from the heavens, and instantly slapped his signature on the contract. The deal was brutally simple and absolutely terrifying. If Philip ever deliberately betrayed his new boss, he'd be slammed with a pain so intense it would feel like his very soul was being ripped to shreds. The witch who cast the spell on the contract then casually explained that if Philip had a problem with the terms, he could just awaken his inner power, become at least a high-ranking knight, maybe hire a four-circle mage, or fork over several hundred times the contract's value to shatter the curse. Philip was, once again, completely floored. With a wave, she told him to get lost and come back some other time. It suddenly dawned on Philip that he might have just gotten himself epically scammed. He did the math. A single page of that magic contract was worth 30 slaves, meaning he'd just paid a king's ransom to chain himself to his savior. Logan laid it out cold. They were strangers, so trust was off the table for now. If he was dropping a fortune, he demanded some serious collateral. Once they actually built some trust, he'd get rid of the contract. He then offered his hand. Philip thought the whole deal was a hot mess, with no end date or clear conditions. But what choice did he have? He took Logan's hand and shook it. When he asked what the first job was, Logan's answer was to go buy a ton of monster meat. Philip's immediate response was to call him a complete psychopath. Honestly, Logan figured that was a pretty fair reaction. Monster blood and flesh are literally toxic, and everyone knew you were supposed to just burn the corpses. But Logan knew something they didn't. In just a few years, the whole world would flip out when the secret to neutralizing monster blood got out. Using just a few common ingredients, regions starving for food would start feasting on monsters. That very winter, nutritional deficiencies would just vanish. From areas where people started eating Kellogg meat, it even cured some dudes who had injuries that made them sterile. A year after that, the Royal Magic Tower would officially confirm it all. The Kellogg monster was basically hunted off the face of the continent, driven to extinction. Once everyone found out, it was a miracle fertility drug. With that future knowledge, Logan knew he could spin this into an easy 3 million gold, probably way more, depending on how much he could hoard. Trailing next to this certified madman, Philip shot Logan a look of pure regret, wondering if he should just cut his losses and make a run for it. Later, inside a tavern, the two of them sat down to map out their next move. Logan nonchalantly told Philip he wanted to drop a cool 1 million gold coins on monster meat. Philip's brain just about short-circuited. He was convinced Logan had finally, officially, lost his damn mind. Logan just told him to chill out, promising with unshakable confidence that he'd make bank even after spending that insane amount. Philip wasn't having it and pushed back hard. He demanded to know if Logan was absolutely, 100% serious. Logan confirmed it without even blinking, so Philip switched gears, asking about the going rate for Kellogg meat per carcass. He explained that, right now, the stuff was basically garbage. Nobody buys it, so everyone just incinerates it on site. If you sent a nobody, a level 0 grunt, to go collect the bodies, you'd be out about 200 gold, just from the kingdom's transport fees. And that fee was charged for every single body. But, if you transported a whole bunch of Kellogg's at once, the cost per unit would plummet. Philip had to admit, he was shocked Logan had even factored in transportation costs, and conceded that his numbers were spot on. He then asked, with that kind of price point, and a 1 million gold budget, if Logan was planning to hire a mercenary guild for a kingdom-wide extermination tour, buying up everything they could hunt. Logan said that was exactly the plan. He then asked if Philip saw any problems with that. Philip immediately shot him down, saying his entire strategy was dead wrong. Since everyone was just chucking the monster meat anyway, he shouldn't hire killers. He should hire a merchant guild. Merchants will move and sell literally anything, as long as you flash some cash. You could call it literal trash, and they'd still deliver it with a smile. Philip added with a smirk that the moment Logan put in the order, every merchant in the kingdom would be scrambling to deliver. Every last scrap of Kellogg meat they could find, probably already butchered and ready to go. Logan was genuinely impressed, thinking his new investment was already a massive win. With a grin that was half joking and half suspicious, he called Philip one adorable little punk. Philip just waved it off. He told Logan to stop stressing about the money. From this point on, he would handle everything. After all, His entire future was now riding on Logan's success. Logan then slid a list of materials over to Philip, stuff like ironwood cartridges, springs, and industrial glue. He wanted him to purchase all of it in massive quantities. Philip's suspicions flared up again, asking if Logan was about to open a freaking toy factory. Logan just replied that he had something way bigger planned. What he was really doing was having Philip gather the raw components for weapons of war. He vividly remembered these exact materials being used to craft the weapons from the invasion of the Grandia Kingdom back in his previous life. Deployed, right? Even a single soldier armed with this gear could stop a fully armored knight dead in their tracks. He also remembered that he'd already sent Dwayne to start recruiting mercenaries. Just slapping these new weapons into their hands would be enough to completely dominate the coming regional conflict. But before he could kick things off, Logan was missing two critical pieces of the puzzle: a craftsman with the genius to forge his weapons, and a master instructor to whip his new mercenaries into shape. 2 days later, we're in Harun, the infamous city of mercenaries. Logan finds himself across from Kaisalon, an A-rank merc, trying to recruit him for the instructor gig. But Kaisalon's skeptical, claiming he's never successfully trained anyone in his life. Logan waves it off, insisting it's a cakewalk. All he needs is for Kaisalon to level up some C-rank recruits. Still unconvinced, Kaisalon doubles down, saying whatever rumors Logan heard were just that. The most he'd ever done was give a few pointers to some greenhorns. He tells Logan to find a pro, but Logan just smirks, knowing it's a total lie. He remembers Kaisalon from his past life. This man was a living weapon, a master of every blade, a prodigy on horseback, and a legendary teacher. The mercenary squad Kaisalon, whipped into shape after a career-ending injury, was the most feared unit on the continent. Logan throws out a number, 4,000 gold coins. Kaisalon shuts him down. Logan ups the ante to 6,000. Still a hard no, 7,000. And Kaisalon just keeps shaking his head, muttering that some things can't be bought. So Logan makes one last push, 8,000. And that was the magic number. Kaisalon's entire demeanor changes. He immediately agrees, practically tripping over himself to thank Logan. Mid-conversation, Logan drops the bomb that he's the firstborn son of Baron McLean, then casually asks if Kaisalon isn't the least bit curious why a noble is hiring mercs out in the sticks. Kaisalon just shrugs. As long as the check's clear, he couldn't care less. As they cut through the city streets, a brutal scene unfolds. A man is lashing a group of people, screaming that if they're late one more time, he'll bury every last one of them. Kaisalon grimly explains that Harun has two reputations: the city of mercenaries and the city of slaves. Sights like this were just part of the daily scenery. The street opens up into a sprawling, chaotic slave market. Logan says he knows this world all too well, and casually mentions he might even buy one today. A sleazy merchant overhears him, pegging him as some rich kid from the country, and rushes over, gushing about his unbeatable deals. But the second the merchant lays eyes on Kaisalon, all the color drains from his face. Seeing the instant fear, Logan lets out a small smile. Hiring Kaisalon was already paying for itself. They finally arrive at a shop, guarded by way more muscle than any other. This was the spot. An old merchant steps out to greet them, and says he assumes Logan knows exactly what kind of establishment this is. Logan cuts straight to the chase. He's here for a dwarf. The merchant confirms he's hit the jackpot, explaining that beings from other worlds are a rare commodity, handled with extreme care. He tries to upsell Logan on a pair of elves first, bragging about how impossible they are to acquire. Logan is completely unfazed. He just tells the guy to cut the crap and bring out the dwarf he knows is chained up in the back. The merchant's eyes widen, pointing out that yes, it's definitely a dwarf, but he adds that even for a race legendary for their smithing, this particular one is a certified expert. Now that gets Logan's attention. He knew all dwarves were naturally gifted blacksmiths, but a true expert? That was a whole other level. Logan asks him to name his price. The merchant grins. The bidding starts at 200,000 gold. Logan just gives him a dead-eyed stare and asks if he looks like an idiot. The merchant practically pees his pants and instantly slashes 50,000 off the price. Kaisalon is absolutely floored, watching Logan bully the price down with a single look. The dwarf scoffs that Logan is a cold-blooded negotiator. Logan just thinks it's basic math. Logan turns to the dwarf and lays out the terms. He's being taken to the McLean estate down in the southwest, and he's going to do the work he's given. The dwarf just nods, putting up no fight. Logan knew this would happen. While dwarves are legendary artisans, slave dwarves are a different breed entirely. Without passion, they can't forge masterpieces. So Logan makes him a deal. Give him 20 years of genuine, dedicated work, and he'll personally see him returned to his mountain home. To a dwarf, 20 years is a blink of an eye. A flicker of hope ignites in his eyes, and he opens his mouth to thank his new master. But just then, chaos erupts. Another slave makes a desperate break for it, only to be tackled by a guard before he gets 10 feet. Logan freezes. He knows that slave, the impossible blue hair, the piercing blue eyes. That aura. He says a name under his breath, catching Kaisalon's ear. It can't be. The freaking noble slayer is right here. Logan's mind flashes back to his previous life. This man, once a nameless slave, escaped by butchering his masters, launching a one-man war against the aristocracy. He vanished for 10 years, only to resurface as a terrifying aura user whose only purpose in life was to hunt down and execute nobles, earning him his grim title. Logan realizes the timeline fits perfectly. This failed escape was supposed to happen a year after Logan became a mercenary. That means the noble slayer is still just a slave. If Logan can snatch him up now, he'll secure a future powerhouse. There's just one tiny problem. The guy's a complete, homicidal maniac. Logan weighs his options. If the guy ever gets out of line, he can just lock him away forever. As the master raises his whip for a crippling blow, Logan's sword is already out, the steel ringing as it intercepts the lash aimed at the man's leg. And the slave trader's eyes go wide as he recognizes the family crest on Logan's hilt, and his whole vibe instantly flipped to pure arrogance. Figuring Logan was just a customer, he faked an apology, claiming the slave was just acting up and needed some discipline. Logan cut him off, saying he wanted to buy, then pointed directly at the two children. The merchant pitched them as priceless treasures, one with fiery red hair, the other with piercing blue eyes. The asking price? An insane 10,000 gold apiece. Logan did the math. A prime slave barely cost 300. He just scoffed at the ridiculous markup and shot back an offer of 500 gold per kid. The merchant sputtered in protest, but Logan cut him off. "Do you really think I don't know the market rate for slaves?" he snapped. The man's face went pale as he scrambled to accept, blaming Victor for being a constant source of trouble. As Kaisalon carried the wounded boy on his back, he was shocked at how fast the kid was healing. Logan played it cool, saying it was nothing. In reality, he was secretly channeling his power, slowly mending the boy's wounds. But then, Victor exploded into action, trying to lunge at Logan. He didn't even come close. In a flash, Logan had him by the throat, asking if he was feeling brave or just plain stupid, and warned him to pick his targets more wisely. Logan promised to keep him and his sister safe if he behaved, but made it crystal clear he'd eliminate them both if he ever tried something like that again. Releasing his grip, he announced his plan to raise Victor as a knight. The boy could only choke out, "Are you for real?" Logan confirmed it, explaining that knights were basically honorary nobles, a path to freedom from slavery, not just for Victor, but for his sister too. In that instant, Victor pledged his undying loyalty. Watching the scene unfold, Logan knew his hunch was right. The sister was the key too, taming the noble slayer's savagery. He declared their training would kick off the moment they got back home. Logan then called over Hamar the dwarf. He told the man he was preparing to draft a contract, a magically binding one, and spelled out the terms. Hamar would serve him for the next 2 decades, and in return, Logan would personally escort him back to the mountains. Hamar was completely stunned. He was in total disbelief that Logan was actually serious about returning him to his homeland. Logan continued, his voice steady, saying it was tough to put faith in promises made of nothing but words that could just be swept away by the wind. He asked if there was a problem with the contract or if Hamar was having second thoughts. Hamar's response was immediate and overflowing with gratitude. He swore he wanted this more than anything and would do whatever Logan commanded. He couldn't stop thanking him, finding it almost impossible to believe someone would actually do this for him. Seeing his reaction, Logan thought to himself that if a simple contract could buy this much devotion, he was the one getting the better end of the deal by far. He considered how this whole expedition had already delivered everything he'd hoped for, and then some. He hadn't just made the necessary preparations for the looming clan war. He'd also managed to acquire the legendary Noble Slayer. His plans were unfolding flawlessly. What he failed to realize, however, was that back at the McLean estate, gossip about his erratic behavior was spreading like wildfire. During his absence, his reputation had absolutely cratered. Rick, in the meantime, was drowning in a sea of confusion, fighting a losing battle to contain the damage while wondering what in the world the young master was even up to anymore. When Logan finally arrived home, no one was happier to see him than Rick. Logan greeted him with a casual, "How've you been?" Rick nearly blew a gasket. "Are you even serious right now?" he stammered, visibly struggling to hold himself together. He demanded to know what Logan had been doing and if he'd caught wind of the insane rumors flying around. According to the gossip, Logan had turned into some kind of depraved monster who blew 150,000 gold on monster meat. Rick frantically explained what went down. A few days prior, some guy named Philip had rounded up every merchant he could and declared he wanted to purchase monster meat under the name of Logan McLean. Even before that bombshell, the rumor mill had already been churning about Logan, spinning tales about his canceled engagement and how he'd essentially robbed his ex-fiancée blind. Philip, completely oblivious to Logan's history, just figured his new boss was some eccentric rich kid. But he saw a golden opportunity in all the drama. He deliberately circulated even more outrageous rumors. about the monster meat to draw in sellers, then ruthlessly dropped the buying price as low as he could without scaring them off, offering a measly 1 gold piece for every kilogram. He gambled that no merchant would pass up the chance to sell literal trash for actual cash. He even challenged them to haul in every single scrap of monster meat they could find. And Philip's aggressive, lowball tactics paid off big time. Merchants started stockpiling monster meat like it was gold. The wild stories about Logan took over nearly the entire Thieves' Quarter. After hearing the full story, Logan simply remarked that Philip had done his job flawlessly. Rick was absolutely floored. He couldn't wrap his head around how Logan could be smiling at a time like this. Logan told him to just look at the faces of the crew he'd brought back, and imagine how many of those rumors they must have heard to look so on edge. As far as Logan was concerned, there was nothing to freak out about. He calmly stated that this would all be over very soon. But Rick warned him not to get too comfortable. The next item on his agenda was a meeting with the family patriarch, and the old man was absolutely furious. Once inside his father's office, Patrick asked Logan if he'd had fun on his little trip running away from home. Logan answered honestly that the journey had been incredibly productive. Patrick acknowledged he'd heard a ton of rumors about the bizarre and reckless stunts Logan had been pulling, but conceded that it looked like he had at least accomplished something. Logan then began to defend his actions, dismissing the rumors as completely baseless and declaring he had zero regrets about his actions. But his stepmother immediately jumped in, snapping at Patrick that she'd already warned him about this. She spat that Logan had no grasp of his own position and couldn't see how his antics were dragging the family's name through the mud. Logan didn't even let her get the words out. He cut her off, telling her she was being way too dramatic. All he did, he claimed, was spend the money from his broken engagement exactly how he wanted. Mary just doubled down, turning to Patrick and demanding if he heard that, asking if he was seriously going to keep defending Logan after all this. That's when Patrick finally broke. He roared at her to be silent, then in a dangerously calm voice, ordered her out of the room. He needed to speak with his son alone. The second the door clicked shut, Patrick warned Logan that this was the absolute final chance he was getting. Standing before his father, who was practically radiating fury, Logan felt a sliver of fear for the first time in a long time. Patrick demanded to know what was really going on inside his son's head, saying they needed to have a brutally honest talk about every single thing that had gone down. Logan knew his father wasn't going to let it slide this time. He shot back that even if he tried to explain, Patrick would never understand him. But Patrick fired right back, asking if maybe Logan was the one who didn't want to be understood. He grilled him, asking if Logan had any idea what people were whispering about him, that he was a violent, cruel, money-grubbing, and emotionally unstable wreck. Patrick's voice cracked as he asked how much longer he was expected to cover for him. He begged Logan that if the day came when he couldn't protect him anymore, to at least give him a heads up. That way, Patrick could tell himself he had done everything in his power for the sake of Logan's deceased mother. Logan was floored. In his entire previous life, Patrick had never once brought up his mother, not even when he was disowned. That single fact made him think his old man hadn't totally given up on him. So Logan pushed for one more thing. He asked his father to give him 1 year. He promised that inside of that year, he would prove the reasons behind his insane behavior. He begged for one last chance. Later, we see Patrick alone in his study, replaying that insane conversation in his head. He admitted to himself how messed up it was for a father and son to be cutting deals with each other like total strangers. He resolved that if Logan failed to prove himself after 1 year, he'd be forced to make a hard choice, because before being a father, he was the head of the McLean household. Patrick stared at a portrait of Logan's mother and apologized to her, confessing he didn't know what was happening to their boy. He kept talking to her, painting, admitting he'd promised to protect Logan and raise him right, but everything had just imploded because of his own neglect. While walking through the castle's corridors, Logan suddenly ran into his younger brother, and what he saw made him freeze on the spot. Ronian had awakened his force. Ronian smirked that Logan figured it out quick, adding that he'd caught up to him faster than expected. A genuine wave of happiness washed over Logan, seeing Ronian awaken so young, at only 14 years old. In his past life, Ronian's power didn't manifest until the middle of the clan war, but this time, it was way ahead of schedule. Ronian told Logan that it was all thanks to him. Seeing Logan's confused look, he explained that when Logan returned, the knights tried to block him from getting to his brother. In that single, desperate moment, his power exploded, and he ended up wiping the floor with the knights just for a chance to see Logan. Logan just threw his head back and laughed, praising him, telling him he absolutely crushed it. He thought to himself that once Ronian's power stabilized, teaching him the secrets of the divine sword would turn him into a beast far stronger than he ever was in the previous timeline. Sometime later, in a cabin south of the McLean estate, Logan finally met with Dwayne. Dwayne reported that all 35 of the rank C mercenaries he had requested were present, and these mercs were beyond furious. It had been 10 days since they were summoned, and not a single one had even laid eyes on Logan. Some were grumbling that only a crazy person would try to ghost a mercenary guild, especially some low-tier baron's family. Others pointed out that the rumors swirling around Logan were already reaching them, and none of it was good. One guy openly mocked Logan's gear, saying he was just playing soldier with his fancy armor and sword. Listening to all the trash talk, Logan knew that if he didn't put these so-called professionals in their place immediately, he'd never get them under his control. He stared down one of the mercs and asked him directly if he thought wearing armor was some kind of joke. The guy stammered that he didn't know what he meant and asked how Logan could have possibly hurt him from so far away. Logan just scoffed at him, saying that kind of attitude only works if you actually have the power to back it up. He called him out as nothing but a worthless rank C merc and asked what imaginary skills gave him the audacity to look down on anyone else. He then dripped sarcasm, asking if he'd offended his delicate pride, and told him to step forward if he wanted to handle it. Then, Logan laid down an undeniable challenge. If that mercenary could land a single scratch on him, he could walk away that very second with a full year's salary. Logan swore it on his honor as a noble, model, and made damn sure every single person there was a witness. The sellsword swaggered forward with a smirk, declaring that Logan was trapped by his own words. He puffed out his chest, trying to look intimidating, but his hulking frame just got the crowd whispering. Some guy wondered if he was already a B rank. Someone else chimed in that he'd definitely hit it after this gig. Logan let out a short, sharp laugh, so that was the source of all this clown's confidence. The mercenary smugly told Logan to take the first shot. Logan shot back that he was going to seriously regret that decision. Ignoring the warning, the merc boasted that he'd been wielding a sword since Logan was in diapers and had nothing to fear. He even mockingly asked if Logan needed a handicap. Logan channeled his energy, and his fist slammed directly into the man's face. The entire crowd went dead silent. The duel was over in a single heartbeat. The mercenary lay flat on his back, teeth scattering across the ground like tiny, white pebbles. The other mercenaries just gaped, their jaws on the floor. Logan simply rolled his shoulder, scoffed, and asked if anyone else wanted to run their mouth. They couldn't wrap their heads around it. A kid his age, already a master of force? It was completely insane. Kaisalon just watched from the side, thinking to himself that he'd always sensed something special about Logan, but he never dreamed it was on this level. Logan announced that from now on, the commentary was over. Then, he officially introduced himself. Logan McLean, the very person who had summoned them all here. He got straight to the point, saying he knew they were all probably wondering why he was dropping so much cash to hire a bunch of sellswords. He told them his grand design was to forge them into an order of crossbow knights. Dwayne and Kaisalon's eyes went wide, while the mercenaries looked utterly bewildered. One of them grumbled that they'd be spending half their lives just reloading the damn things. Kaisalon leaned in and quietly told Logan that crossbows were notoriously inefficient weapons for mounted knights. Logan replied flatly that he was well aware. Utterly confused, Kaisalon asked why he'd push for them then. Logan explained that while crossbows packed way more of a punch than bows, a greenhorn on horseback needs more than a minute just to reload one. Even if they carried a few preloaded ones, their firepower would evaporate in seconds. So yeah, it was no shock they were all confused. Logan told Kaisalon to just drill them properly for now, even if he thought his young master was just wasting stacks of cash, playing at war. He promised the real reason would reveal itself down the line. As his final power move, Logan declared that the crossbow cavalry would become an unstoppable weapon for House McLean, not just for the war, but for threats that loomed far beyond the bandit problem. Kaisalon was still lost, but he bowed to his master's command. A couple of days later, Logan was alone in his study, poring over a document. Out of the 350 mercenaries they'd brought in, only 312 managed to clear the most basic qualification test. Logan looked over the final count and decided it was more than enough to work with. But before he could get lost in his plans, a voice cut through the silence. It was Hammer, asking what kind of paper had Logan so engrossed. Logan explained it was a schematic for a crossbow he needed Hammer to forge. He admitted that the sketch probably looked like a child's drawing, to a master craftsman. But in his head, Logan knew this weapon intimately. He'd relied on it for decades in his past life, so he sketched out every single detail he could dredge up from memory. He was betting on a master like Hammer to make the impossible possible. Hammer squinted at the blueprints, pointing out that this design would need some kind of cartridge on the back to hold the bolts, feed them automatically, and pop off 3 shots in a row. He then demanded to know what kind of lunatic came up with this garbage. Logan calmly admitted it was his idea, which instantly set the dwarf on edge. Despite his frustration, Hammer conceded that the core idea was actually genius. But, he warned, twisting the bowstring like that would cause it to snap instantly, and strapping a clunky wooden box to the stock would make it a nightmare for any shooter to handle. He stared Logan down, asking what his solution was for those glaring flaws. Logan just casually shot back that it wasn't his problem. Hammer was the expert, so he should figure it out. The dwarf's face turned beet red with fury. Seeing he'd gone too far, Logan quickly said he was just messing with him. He agreed the bolt size had to be smaller, to shrink the cartridge, and he conceded it would have to be a single-shot weapon for now. But then, he proposed a workaround, manufacturing preloaded cartridges that could be swapped out after every shot, calling them magazines to keep it simple. Hammer was completely stunned. He stammered that even the best marksman on the planet couldn't fire a crossbow twice in under a minute. This design felt like it was from a different dimension entirely. Logan thought to himself, that's because it is. It was a weapon, forged in the fires of the future. Hammer then grumbled that most people think you can slap together a weapon with just a spring, some wood, glue, and a string. To him, though, this wasn't an insult. It was a god-tier challenge. He declared he'd give it a shot. Logan immediately pounced, asking when he could have it. Hammer fired back, asking if Logan was seriously trying to put a deadline on a concept no one in this world had ever even seen. Logan replied that it was still a weapon, forged by human hands. Hammer, confused, asked who made it and where. Logan dodged the question and flipped the script, saying that if the great Hammer thought he couldn't do it, he should just admit defeat now. That was all it took to light a fire under the dwarf's pride. He roared that he only needed 1 month, and he swore he would deliver something that blew this design out of the water. Watching the whole scene, Logan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. Turns out, bruising a dwarf's ego was the ultimate cheat code. A little later, Victor was pounding the dirt of the castle training grounds, already hammering out laps. Logan barked that he was slacking again, and that he had more in the tank. Victor grit his teeth and forced himself to accelerate. Logan couldn't help but think back. For days after bringing the kid in, all he'd done was stuff him with decent food and let him crash. The glow-up from that alone was staggering. Finally, Logan called for a break, and Victor's little sister immediately sprinted to his side. Logan thought again about what a ridiculously smart investment Victor was at just 14 years old. Despite being undersized for his age, Victor had just crushed a 20-kilometer run without a single stop. The kid's potential was off the charts, but what truly blew Logan's mind was his sheer grit. It was like pain and exhaustion were concepts that just didn't apply to him. It clicked for Logan right then. Victor wasn't some born noble slayer. No, this path he was on, it was all for his sister. Shaking the thought away, Logan snapped that rest time was over. He chucked a sword at the boy, announcing that from this second forward, Victor would start learning the sword style of the Grandia Kingdom, the basic 101 playbook for every knight in training. A moment later, Logan called for Victor's full attention and decided to show him how it was done. He seized the sword's hilt and carved a powerful arc through the air. Victor's expression was flat. All he wanted was to faceplant and pass out. Still, he clenched his jaw. If soul-crushing exhaustion was the ticket to good meals and a real bed, then he would gladly pay the price. He mirrored Logan's exact form, his blade cutting the air in a flawless copy. Watching him, Logan's jaw practically hit the floor. Victor's form was a perfect duplicate of his own, right down to his breathing rhythm, and Logan had only demonstrated the move once. Seeing how easily Victor picked it up, Logan had to admit that not even Ronian possessed this level of raw talent. Logan told Victor that once he built up enough stamina and could execute the technique perfectly, over 1,000 times in a row, only then could he call himself a true knight. A fire ignited in Victor's eyes at the very idea. When Logan asked if he thought he could pull it off, Victor shot back with a defiant, "I can." Logan then added that, if Victor needed any gear for his training, he just had to hit up Rick, who would likely sort out most of his requests. Victor just shook his head, saying he was good. Logan pressed him, but Victor's one and only request was for Logan to look after his sister. That was all the motivation he needed. Logan thought it was the perfect response as he resumed supervising Victor's grind. Logan knew the kid wasn't ready for a real war yet, but down the line, he would become an absolute monster for House McLean. He also figured that his mercs, armed with whatever insane weapon Hamar was cooking up, would become a truly terrifying force. Still, Logan forced himself to pump the brakes. Hamar might totally fail to engineer a working crossbow, and even if he did, his mercenaries might have no clue how to wield it. Since he was outsourcing so much, Logan knew he had to cook up a backup plan. Sometime after, Logan marched into his father's office and formally requested to join the Knights training program. To his absolute shock, Patrick agreed. That same night, on the training grounds, Captain Hankley formally presented Logan to the rest of the Knights, making it crystal clear that he would now be training right alongside them. The announcement landed like a lead balloon. Whispers immediately ripped through the assembled ranks. Most of the Knights were convinced Logan was treating their order like a joke, especially after he'd publicly clowned Dominan. As the murmurs intensified, Hankley's mind flashed back to a tense conversation with the Patriarch. He recalled standing in Patrick's chambers, debating Logan's entry into the order. Hankley had been vehemently against the idea. He'd warned Patrick that the other knights would never truly let him in. Patrick, however, had shut that down immediately. He bluntly told Hankley that he wasn't asking for his son to get special treatment. In fact, he demanded Logan be handled just like any other Greenhorn recruit, maybe even rougher. Back in the present, Hankley reflected that despite those harsh words, Logan was still the Lord's kid. Life would have been way easier if Patrick had just told him to go easy on the boy. But then, Logan noticed the captain's anxiety and cut in. He promised that if he failed a single part of their training in the coming week, he would walk away and never get in Hankley's way again. The captain was stunned by this declaration but eventually agreed. With that settled, Hankley decided to make the next week a living hell. The nightly orders training regimen was about to be dialed up to 3 times its usual insanity. Moments later, one knight found himself running, with another knight on his back, wondering what kind of fresh hell this was. Hankley just bellowed at them not to die, reminding them that as cavalry knights, they had to understand what it felt like to be the damn horse. He screamed at them to feel the burden of hauling armored warriors across a chaotic battlefield. That's when it finally clicked for the knights why they'd been sweating in full armor all this time. Some of them cursed under their breath, blaming this entire ordeal on the troublesome newcomer. They even started placing bets on how long Logan would last. 1 day, 2 days, maybe he'd make it to 3. They were all dead wrong. Logan was already sprinting at full tilt. He was an absolute blur, charging through the field and weaving past the other knights, leaving the entire squad completely speechless. Even Captain Hankley was staggered. To make it even more infuriating, Logan had a massive grin plastered on his face the entire time. Hankley was getting seriously heated. He realized it wasn't Logan who was about to gas out, it was his own men. He immediately barked at everyone to halt, and called a 10-minute break. He then strode over to Logan, asking him how he was holding up after a run like that. What Hankley was truly fishing for was an admission of total exhaustion, any excuse to pull Logan from this absolute madness. But Logan sliced right through his sentence before he could even finish. "Easy," he said. Hankley was dumbstruck and stammered, asking what he meant. Logan explained that this was some top-tier training. If the knights endured this kind of hell daily, there was no chance they wouldn't become absolute units. He even added that he was stoked for the next session. Not far off, 2 knights were sprawled on the ground, looking like they were about to pass out. Hankley knew this was not how his plan was supposed to unfold. Logan, however, clearly couldn't care less. Later that night, Logan scanned the training grounds to find himself utterly alone. The entire squad had already bailed. Standing there, he considered his real motivation. This grueling training was just his insurance policy. If all his other schemes went up in flames, he could still fall back on joining the knights and becoming a beast on the front lines. Forging those connections now would pay off big time later. But there was another layer to it. Meditation was how he cultivated his force. But the physical grind was equally vital, and the nightly order served up the perfect challenge. As he pictured his force core becoming denser, and his body feeling zero fatigue, Logan drew his blade and unleashed a lightning-fast force flash, perfectly clean and sharp. He was amazed that all this juice came from a measly 1-star core. Once he hit 2 stars, he was certain he could go toe-to-toe with a high-ranking knight like his own father. The very next morning, Logan tested the crossbows Hamar had crafted and immediately declared them all garbage. He bluntly asked Hamar if this was honestly the best he had. He ripped into the design, pointing out it was a single-shot weapon with no magazine system in sight. He hammered the point that the mechanism had to be integrated. Hamar absolutely erupted. Logan immediately backpedaled, admitting that he'd been way too harsh. Hamar shot back that Logan was right about one thing. No matter what their deal was, you never insult a craftsman's pride. But what Logan was really implying was that if this was Hamar's absolute limit, then their entire operation was screwed. That single thought almost made the dwarf completely lose it. Logan kept pushing his buttons, muttering that maybe he'd put too much faith in him. Weeks had evaporated with nothing to show for it, and that's when Logan went for the throat. He straight up told Hamar he had misjudged him, torched a fortune on him, and was a complete fool for ever trusting him. That was the final trigger. Hamar demanded 1 more month, guaranteeing he would forge something worthy of the massive investment. In a fit of pure rage, he shattered the crossbow in his grip before storming away. Logan just watched him go, thinking about how that white-hot anger would fuel him, forcing him to rebuild from the ground up. A cruel smirk crept onto Logan's face as he wondered just how far Hamar could be pushed. 1 month later, on one of the training fields, Hamar returned to unveil his new creation. The upgraded crossbow fired 2 bolts at once. Logan was absolutely floored. Hamar explained that even though it held 1 less shot than requested, it was way easier to handle with 1 hand, and let him swap magazines in a heartbeat. But what really blew Logan's mind was the reload speed, 2 seconds flat. That alone shattered his expectations. While the weapon had less range and was smaller than the one from his past life, it was infinitely better for fighting on horseback. For a cavalry charge, it was flawless. Logan couldn't get over how far ahead of schedule they were, with months still to go before the war. When Hamar asked if Logan was even paying attention, Logan suddenly hoisted him into the air like a little kid, shouting praises and hyping up all dwarves, wishing long life to Hamar and all his kin. Hamar started panicking, begging him to put him down before anyone saw. He reminded Logan he wasn't a child. Logan set him down, looked him dead in the eye, and his entire vibe shifted, clearly about to make a huge request. When Hamar asked what was up, Logan's expression turned chillingly serious again. He said he needed 400 of these crossbows, and he needed them in 2 months. Logan then passed the finished crossbows to Castellan, and the mercenaries to put them through their paces. The instant they fired, everyone was stunned. Bolts flew an unbelievable distance, and the weapons spit out consecutive shots. With no delay, Castellan inspected one, completely baffled. A front-loading crossbow with this kind of range, raw power, and firing speed should be impossible. As the implications sunk in, Castellan started to imagine the possibilities. The sheer destructive power of over 300 mounted warriors brandishing these weapons. The very thought sent ice racing through his veins. He confessed to Logan that his creation was a terrifying work of genius, and in that instant, everything finally clicked. And yeah, this was Logan's master plan all along. He straight up admitted it, reflecting on how Hamar had powered through an absolute gauntlet to make this happen, even with a whole crew of craftsmen backing him up. Logan was floored. He never expected Hamar to wrap up the order, a full 2 months ahead of schedule, let alone crank out an extra 100 crossbows. That was the signature of a true dwarven master. There was no question about it. For a split second, Logan debated sharing this game-changing tech with the knights and the regular foot soldiers, but the astronomical cost made it a complete fantasy. Worse still was the risk of the schematics getting leaked. For now, it was smarter to keep this power on lockdown. He gave Castellan his orders, outfit the mercenaries with the new weapons, and scrub the territory clean of the monsters infesting the borders. At first, Castellan thought the plan was pure suicide, but Logan's confidence didn't waver for a second. After mulling it over, Castellan conceded that it might just work, but for Logan, might wasn't going to cut it. He ordered Castellan to make it a reality, because if he failed, nothing else would even matter. That's when the chilling realization dawned on Castellan. Logan hadn't forged this weapon to hunt some overgrown beasts. He was preparing for war. During a grueling night training session, one knight remarked on Logan's inhuman physical stamina. Another quipped about whether that insane endurance was just part of his family's genetics. A third chimed in that if Logan was anything like the patriarch, he was probably a demon with a blade, too. The gossip then shifted to Logan's duel with Dominan, until a different knight warned the others to never compare him to Patrick. Even before his awakening, Logan had been totally crushed by his own younger brother. Still, it was wild that he'd survived this brutal regimen for over a month. The very training program, designed to break his spirit and force him to quit, had instead become the new gold standard for the entire Knight Order. The training was utterly draining, but a million times more rewarding than their old, mindless drills. This felt like the real deal, the level actual knights should be at. Shockingly, it lit a fire under the lower-ranking knights, who had been coasting for years. They were also starting to form genuine connections with their horses, building a powerful, unspoken bond. It suddenly dawned on Captain Hankley that he'd only kept this hellish training going because the young lord simply refused to back down. He never in his wildest dreams imagined it would yield results like this. It felt like a massive stroke of good fortune had just walked right through his door. That evening, in the solitude of his chamber, Logan took stock of the progress he had made. After pushing his body to its absolute limit with brutal training, he would plunge his consciousness into deep meditation, a flawless cycle that was working perfectly, and he could feel the tangible results. His force was already beginning to feel denser, more refined. If he kept this up, he was dead certain he could blow past the power levels of the monsters from his previous life. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. A surge of energy flooded Logan's core as it expanded. He started rambling incoherently as the transformation hit its peak, and just like that, his core skyrocketed to the 2-star level. He knew instantly what this meant. He now had the foundation to learn the next secret sword art, Iron Cut, a murderous iron cut. Just the memory of the insane power from the first technique made his pulse hammer in his chest. The second technique, if he could just master it before the war kicked off, would be on a whole other level. At that point, not even a high-ranking knight would be able to faze him. The very next day, Castellan and the mercenaries ran into a goblin scouting party. The soldiers simply raised their weapons and opened fire, shredding the monsters in a flash. One of the mercs remarked on the near-total lack of recoil, while his buddy watched a single bolt punch through one goblin's head and bury itself in the chest of the one behind it. Logan watched an entire swarm of over 100 monsters get absolutely annihilated in less than 10 seconds. The mercenaries' sloppy habits, from using basic crossbows, were completely gone. They were swapping magazines with terrifying speed now, Logan mused. The grueling journey this deep into monster territory had definitely paid off. Casalon sauntered over, asking if Logan was satisfied. Logan smirked. More or less. He couldn't help but remember how much of a disaster their first hunt was. The glow-up since then was insane. Casalon then got serious, questioning why Logan had gone to such extremes. He'd never even heard of a mercenary company packing this kind of heat. He even half-jokingly asked if Logan was planning a hostile takeover of the entire continent's monster population. Before Logan could drop a witty comeback, a knight on horseback galloped into their camp at full speed, carrying an urgent message from Rick. The day before, Viscount Tesron had officially declared war on House McLean. Cut to the McLean war room, where Patrick and the other heads of the family are gathered around a crystal ball, watching Viscount Tesron's broadcasted announcement. His reason? He was blaming House McLean for the supposed unjust death of one of his ancestors from ages ago. Patrick was utterly speechless. Around the room, nobles exchanged baffled glances, wondering if that was seriously the best excuse he could come up with for starting a war. Hankley and Marion turned to Patrick, demanding to know his plan. Hankley laid out the grim reality. Tesron's Knight Order alone dwarfed their own. Even with a beast like Patrick on the field, their chances looked bleak. One noble immediately suggested they just barricade the city and pray for reinforcements. Another proposed sending a diplomat to beg for peace. That's when Patrick exploded. "Everyone, shut up," he roared. He reminded them that while the royal family's power had faded, declaring war without their permission made one thing crystal clear. Tesron had this planned from the very beginning. Peace was never an option. Patrick ordered them to begin war preparations immediately and demanded a strategy that guaranteed victory, making it clear he wouldn't listen to any more talk of surrender. In the tense silence that followed, a noble nervously asked if young Master Logan would be joining the fight. Patrick's reply was short and cold. "He will." Marion added that Ronion's own force had finally awakened, making him old enough to be thrown into the fray as well. Realizing Logan was still out in the field, Rick scrambled to dispatch a messenger to find him. When Logan finally got the news, he was completely blindsided. According to his memories of the past timeline, this war wasn't supposed to break out for at least another 2 months. Something had drastically accelerated the schedule. The messenger begged him to hurry back, explaining that Viscount Tesron hadn't waited. He launched an all-out assault the very same day he declared war, a move that shattered every known military custom. Logan had to get to the battlefield, and he had to get there now. Casalon and his mercenaries didn't even hesitate, declaring they were packed and ready to march on his command. Logan raised an eyebrow. "You don't seem surprised at all." Casalon just let out a dark chuckle. "War is good for business. If a war doesn't exist, we'll start one ourselves," he said with a grin. "And now that we have weapons like these, it's only right we get to use them." Logan scanned his troops. They were radiating a dangerous level of overconfidence. Still, he didn't try to dampen their spirits. It wasn't like their confidence was baseless. They had spent months grinding non-stop, and they had just effortlessly erased hordes of monsters with pure firepower. "It doesn't matter when the war starts," Logan announced, his voice ringing with authority. "The only thing that matters is that we win." Believing his army was more than ready, Logan gave the order to march toward the McLean Plains, absolutely convinced that this war would end with their flag flying high. Back in the barony, the invasion had slammed into them far earlier than anyone could have predicted. A single day after the declaration, Tesron's entire army materialized before the McLean estate. The scale of their forces was beyond anyone's worst nightmare. Captain Hankley delivered the scouts' report, his voice strained. They were facing 100 knights, over 1,000 professional soldiers, and an army of nearly 10,000 conscripts. This wasn't a battle. This was a full-scale war. Patrick could only think that Tesron had completely lost his damn mind. It was one thing to deploy his elite, superhuman knights, but to also drag 10,000 barely trained conscripts into what was supposed to be a limited, internal conflict? Patrick just couldn't wrap his head around it. What in the world could be pushing Viscount Tesron to this level of insanity? And then, the situation spiraled from bad to catastrophic. Hankley burst in with the news that House Kiros had sent a message. They were officially refusing to send any backup. Patrick and Mary were completely floored, just stunned into silence. Mary immediately shot back that it had to be some kind of sick joke, swearing that she and Dwayne had double-checked everything to prevent this exact nightmare. With their backs against the wall, Patrick gave Hankley a grim command. Assemble every single person capable of lifting a sword. They were about to unleash everything they had. Patrick could only think of the bitter irony how Kairos, the house they'd trusted without question, had just thrown them to the wolves in their most desperate hour. House McLean mustered every last fighter they could find. 53 knights, 552 professional soldiers, and 4,418 conscripts, making a total of 5,023 combatants. It was still less than half of what Tesron was bringing. Down on the battlefield, the tension was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. Two soldiers whispered, "Hey, any sign of the young master Logan?" The other just shook his head. He's been gone for what feels like forever and still hasn't shown. Nearby, a few other soldiers started grumbling. They were betting he wasn't coming back at all, figuring he probably booked it the second he heard war was coming. Hearing this, Ronian spun around, his eyes blazing. "What the hell are you all talking about?" he snapped. "There's no way." He insisted Logan would never pull a stunt like that. Ronian was certain his brother had seen this war coming from a mile away, and that was precisely why Logan had taught him that secret technique. Logan, running away now? Impossible. But as his passionate defense echoed, other soldiers nearby overheard. Instead of squashing the rumors, his words just threw gasoline on the fire that was already spreading through the ranks, the one about the Lord's eldest son being a deserter. Moments later, Patrick appeared at Ronian's side. He looked his youngest son dead in the eye. He told him that he was now taking Logan's place on the front line, ordering him to show no fear and no hesitation. A part of Patrick didn't want to believe the rumors either, but what he believed didn't matter anymore. All that mattered now was victory. Fueled by that cold resolve, he roared the command for all troops to advance and utterly crush the scum who dared set foot on his land. Just then, Tesseron himself appeared with a cocky smirk, absolutely delighted to see Patrick finally draw his blade. He bellowed that his knights were his personal sword, and he dared Patrick to face their steel. Patrick flared his aura and launched himself like a missile, trying to blast a hole right through the enemy's vanguard. But his charge was stopped cold. A single knight with a massive shield absorbed the entire impact, leaving Patrick momentarily shocked. Rick was also trapped in the chaos, his face a mask of pure terror. He watched men getting slaughtered, literally torn limb from limb, right in front of him. The horrifying reality hit him. They were losing, and they were losing badly. They were so desperate, they'd even shoved non-combatants, like him, onto the battlefield just to have more bodies. If the enemy managed to completely surround them, they were all dead. In the midst of his panic, a Tesseron soldier smashed him over the head from behind, raising a sword for the killing blow. He barely dodged as an ally jumped in, slaying the attacker and screaming at Rick to get up and get his spear ready. Rick turned to thank the man, but before a single word could escape his lips, an enemy knight cut his savior down in a spray of crimson that splattered across Rick's face. In that instant, Rick's mind went crystal clear. His only shot at survival was to run as far from the front lines as he possibly could. Enemy cavalry thundered past as Rick stumbled and tripped over piles of corpses, both friend and foe. Then came the soul-crushing realization. They were being flanked from behind, too. This was it. This was where they were all going to die. Elsewhere, Patrick was locked in a brutal fight. After he deflected a powerful blow, the knight he was facing actually smirked. The man admitted Patrick was just as good as his reputation claimed. Patrick, however, felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. It was obvious they had prepared specifically for him, and even then, he wasn't feeling confident in his current state. He saw that this knight had tanked hits charged with explosive power and was still standing. But what really made Patrick's blood run cold was the realization that Tesseron had a high-ranking knight in his army, and based on their flawless teamwork, the other knights closing in on him were probably intermediate level at a minimum. So that was it. That was why they fought without an ounce of fear. Patrick snarled, demanding to know if they were the kill squad sent just for him. The knight simply fired back a question of his own. "So, what do you think of the party we've thrown for you?" Trapped by 4 elite knights, Patrick knew that if he stayed pinned down, the whole situation would snowball out of control as more and more knights poured in. He let out a battle cry and charged forward again, roaring that he would never let that happen. He clashed steel with the high ranker, only to be ambushed from behind by another enemy, lunging with a spear. He twisted his body, narrowly avoiding the fatal thrust. Seeing them swarm him from all sides, Patrick erupted in pure fury, screaming about whether they had any honor as knights, calling them a pack of cowards. His enemies clearly did not give a damn. One of them even laughed that this would be Patrick's last ever battle, so he might as well stop complaining. Patrick poured every last shred of his strength into one final, desperate attack, his sword crashing against his opponents. But this time, his luck had run out. A spearhead burst through his back, ripping straight through his stomach and leaving him grievously wounded. And that's when it all clicked. The high-ranking knight was just a diversion, a tank to keep him busy while the grunts took cheap shots from every angle. It was a flawless trap, and he was completely boxed in. As the enemy swarmed him, Patrick bitterly admitted to himself that Logan had made the right call. By getting away, there was at least a sliver of hope that Logan would survive to carry on the family name. From a safe distance, Azron watched the chaos unfold with a smug grin. He was seriously feeling himself. He'd kept his ace in the hole night under wraps for this exact moment. Once Patrick went down, McLean Castle would be a cakewalk. But right as he was about to give his next command, an unexpected sound echoed from behind him, the thunder of cavalry. A servant sprinted over, his face pale. He gasped out a report of a mounted unit storming their rear flank, about 300 riders, maybe even more. Tesseron went still. Were these secret troops the McLeans had been hiding? The servant hesitated for a beat, then added that something was off. The charging cavalry had no lances. Their only weapons were tiny crossbows. At this, Tesseron completely lost it, bursting into laughter. He mocked the report, sneering about little hunters' crossbows. He barked an order for the rear guard and archers to just wipe them off the map, brushing them off as a bunch of fifth-rate nobodies. He didn't even finish his sentence before a bolt zipped through the air and punched a hole straight through the servant's head. A chill went down Tesseron's spine. Logan had just entered the chat, and he was pissed. Tesseron screamed the order to fire on instinct. An absolute storm of bolts rained down on Tesseron's forces, shredding through armor, splintering shields, and tearing through flesh like it was paper. Hundreds of his men dropped in mere seconds. One soldier had the terrifying realization that anyone who hadn't gotten a shield up in time was already a corpse, and that he would have been right there with them if he'd been a split second slower. Tesseron's archers frantically loosed their own arrows, but they fell pathetically short of the mark. Their bows just didn't have the range to touch Logan's crew. Another volley ripped through the air, carving down even more of Tesseron's soldiers. He watched as his entire rear flank just collapsed. Tesseron couldn't process what he was seeing. There was no magic, no spells, just those damn crossbows. What kind of demonic weapon did they create? He roared, his face purple with rage, ordering his knights to turn around and obliterate those bastards. The knights charged at a full gallop straight for Logan's line. Logan just watched them come, a cold smile spreading across his face. At that very moment, another battle was raging nearby. Ronian was locked in a deadly dance with an enemy knight. He ducked under a vicious swing, and his opponent just laughed at him. "Nice moves," the knight taunted. As steel crashed all around them, another soldier yelled to his comrade, "Quit playing with the kid. This ain't a game anymore." But the knight just shot back, "Trust me, I'm not holding back." He added that even though Ronian was just a kid, he was definitely not to be underestimated. As Ronian overheard their conversation, it hit him like a truck. This wasn't training, this was a real war. And compared to this absolute carnage, he realized he wasn't some legendary prodigy. He was just a boy who'd awakened his power a little early. But even so, he absolutely could not lose. Way too much was riding on him. He thought of his father, who had trusted him to be Logan's stand-in for this war. He couldn't afford to hesitate. As his thoughts raced, an opening suddenly appeared. Ronian saw it. One of the enemy soldiers had made a fatal mistake, turning his back for just a second. He was completely exposed. Ronian had no clue why the guy was being so careless, but he knew an opportunity like this was a one-shot deal. Without a second thought, he swung his blade in a clean, decisive arc. His sword sliced straight through the soldier's torso. It was over so fast it was almost anticlimactic, and then he saw it. Sticking out of the fallen man's chest was a crossbow bolt. Ronian's head snapped up, and his face lit up with pure joy. There was Logan in the distance, screaming his name at the top of his lungs. But that sweet moment of relief was tragically short-lived. Another wave of enemy knights was charging hard from behind Ronian, making a beeline straight for Logan under the Viscount's command. Logan tracked their movement, instantly recognizing the classic kite shield formation they were using. It was a solid defensive tactic, for sure, but it wasn't going to be enough, not against him. This was where his true strategy began. Logan calmly ordered his mercenaries to aim their crossbows down at the ground, at an angle. The command totally confused them all over again. Then, Logan cracked that signature, unhinged smile of his, and gave the real order: fire at the horses. He was done playing fair. If it meant winning, dirty tricks were always on the table. The mercenaries got it instantly, their faces twisting into the same bloodthirsty grin as Logan's. A volley of bolts slammed into the charging horses. The mounts screamed in pain as they collapsed, throwing their riders violently onto the battlefield. The entire charge was shattered in seconds. Logan breathed a sigh of relief. He'd made it in time to save Ronian. But the war wasn't over. His father was still in deep trouble, and Logan remembered the promise he made. In this life, he'd save his family. Logan knew this victory was meaningless if Patrick died. He shouted a quick order to Kaisalon, and then immediately bolted towards his father. Kaisalon panicked. This wasn't the plan at all. They were on the verge of total victory, and Logan was risking everything by charging in, alone. Even if Logan was a monster on the battlefield, running into one skilled knight could flip the whole script. Still, Kaisalon took a deep breath and got his head in the game. With Gerald providing cover fire, Logan carved a bloody path straight through the enemy's formation, while Patrick found himself locked in a vicious duel. His opponent, a high-ranking knight, made the whole situation feel hopeless as he taunted Patrick. The knight couldn't get over it, mocking him for charging in so recklessly, fully knowing he was seconds away from being run through. Patrick dodged, twisting his body and leaping back, creating just enough breathing room to analyze his enemy's every move. But something was seriously off. These guys were fighting with a raw desperation, pushing way past their limits, basically just throwing their lives on the line. It made zero sense. They were winning, so why were they acting like cornered rats? Before he could process it, Patrick parried 2 lances aimed right for him. Then, from the chaos, Logan materialized right in front of him. In a flash, Logan sliced down 2 mid-tier knights, leaving Patrick absolutely floored. Patrick was sure he'd seen Logan enter the fray with a merc squad way behind enemy lines. There was no shot. He should have been able to reach this position so damn fast. As Patrick glanced over his shoulder, the scene behind him made his blood run cold. The entire field was a carpet of corpses, a sea of bodies stretching to the horizon. Patrick wanted to demand how Logan got this powerful, but this wasn't the moment. Nothing was adding up anyway. So, he asked the one question that mattered. Did Logan's arrival signal their victory? Logan gave a simple nod. Hearing that, Patrick put a hand on his son's shoulder, telling him how proud he was. The elite knight just stared at Logan, completely shook. A 20-year-old kid from some backwater barony just effortlessly smoked 2 mid-level knights. At that same age, this knight had been wrecking his own body just to earn his title. But that was ancient history. His new mission: end this kid, right here, right now. He roared at his fallen men, ordering them to get back in formation. Watching this, a crucial realization hit Patrick. Logan was more than strong enough to deal with the mid-tier knights. If Logan handled them, Patrick could pour everything into fighting the commander. If they did that, they could actually clutch this. But Logan had a different idea. He stepped directly in front of Patrick, arm outstretched, and declared he was taking on the high-ranking knight solo. Patrick instantly shut it down, telling him it was suicide. He admitted Logan had gotten stronger, but this guy was on a whole other level. Patrick never even finished his warning. Logan decked him with a solid punch to the gut, dropping him to the dirt. Coldly, Logan said that in his father's current state, even he could take him down. He told Patrick to trust him and stay out of this fight. Defeated, Patrick caved. He just told Logan to watch his back. Logan shot back that they were out of time. This needed to end, and it needed to end now. The high-ranking knight was absolutely seething. How dare some punk kid come at him? He lunged forward, channeling all his power into a devastating strike. Their swords screamed as they met, and in a single exchange, Logan sent the knight flying back several meters, leaving the man completely staggered. The knight couldn't wrap his head around it. Even with Logan's wounds, he wasn't sensing some insane aura or power level, and yet, he was getting completely overpowered. There was only one possible answer. Logan was redlining it, pushing far beyond his natural limits. The knight charged again, this time with pure killing intent. They became a blur of motion, a deadly dance of steel. They darted back and forth, their blades clashing in a shower of sparks. As their swords locked, the knight thought that if he wasn't injured, this fight would have been over ages ago. That's when Logan spotted it, a tiny, split-second opening. He moved instantly. His blade found its mark, carving a deep gash into his opponent. Logan vaulted backward, barely dodging the furious counterslash. As the knight processed the exchange, he realized there were no obvious weak points. Logan had to create one. Then he felt it, and Logan saw it too. The knight was absorbing the energy from Logan's attacks. Believing his trap was sprung, the knight grinned, declaring Logan had walked right into it as he moved in for the kill. For a second, Logan looked completely off balance. The death blow was about to connect, but it never came. Logan snapped back into his stance instantly, making the knight wonder if his own speed was failing him. A massive aura exploded from Logan as he prepared his sacred art. The knight felt that power surge, and knew, instinctively, that he had to get out of there. But it was far too late. Logan unleashed a catastrophic wave of pure cutting force. The attack vaporized the high-ranking knight in one go. The entire battlefield went dead silent. Logan let out a victory roar, declaring that he, Logan McClane, had personally slain the general of the Tesseron army. A wave of pure panic crashed over Tesseron's forces. The soldiers stared, their minds breaking. Their high-ranking knight was gone, and the Viscount's flag was nowhere to be seen. Their will to fight completely shattered. The sound of swords hitting the dirt filled the air as soldiers pleaded to surrender. Rick started the chant, calling Logan's name, praying for his master's survival. Soon, one voice became 100, until the entire field thundered with his name. The Viscount was already long gone, sprinting from the battlefield, his mind a whirlwind as he tried to figure out how it all went so wrong. 3 full years of planning, all turned to dust. He'd gotten support from other nobles and rallied over 100 knights, but it all went up in smoke, all because of that freaking redhead and his busted-out gear. Tesseron's mind raced. Survival was the only option. If he could just haul it back to his home turf, he might actually get out of this alive. The second he reached his castle, he was screaming for the guards to get the gates open. The soldiers were completely shook, seeing him bolt back out of nowhere. But before the gates were even halfway open, a lookout spotted a cloud of dust on the horizon and yelled a warning. A column of knights was closing in fast, and leading the charge was Logan himself. Tesron just froze. Logan swung off his horse, cool as anything, and smirked that the Viscount sure knew how to run. Then, standing right in front of the gates to Tesron's own fortress, Logan bellowed so everyone could hear that Tesron had already lost this war. He ordered the garrison to swing the gates wide and let the real victor through. Up on the walls, the soldiers just glanced at each other, hesitating. Was it true? Was that why their lord had sprinted home, looking like he'd seen a ghost? Before that doubt could poison the ranks, a general barked at them, demanding to know if they were really gonna fold just because the enemy was talking big. The men immediately snapped back to reality. The general pointed out that there were barely over 300 enemies on their doorstep. As Logan's aura flared to life again, the general scoffed that an army that small could never dream of taking the castle in a siege. The guards at the gate had no idea what Logan was planning until he freaking launched himself over the wall, soaring dozens of meters straight into the air. He landed inside, then calmly told the general to open the gates, unless every single person there had a death wish. Otherwise, he was more than happy to slaughter them all and open it himself. Deep inside the palace, Tesron was frantically shoving gold coins and jewels into sacks, figuring that if he was going to run, he was at least leaving with the bag. All of a sudden, Logan's voice cut through the silence behind him, announcing that he'd finally caught his little rabbit. Tesron stumbled back, absolutely terrified, and demanded to know how Logan had even gotten inside. Logan's reply was ice cold. He said Tesron's own servants sold him out before he even had to draw his sword, which really says a lot about the kind of joke of a ruler the Viscount was. Absolutely furious, Tesron cursed his servants for turning on him. Then, the terror washed over him again. His whole tone shifted, and he started begging, declaring his full surrender, and promising to pay for everything according to the laws of war. He pleaded with Logan, just spare his life, spare his family. But Logan just laughed and asked him what right a snake like him had to talk about rules. He stared down at the pathetic man and reminded him that he was the one who declared war, with zero warning, steamrolling everything in a single day. The rage on Logan's face was undeniable, a vein pulsing on his forehead, as he asked if Tesron even had a conscience. Tesron, desperate, tried one last angle, arguing that noble honor and feudal law were supposed to protect prisoners of war. Logan actually agreed, but on one condition. He said he would absolutely uphold the honor and customs of his own family, House McLean. Therefore, Tesron's life would be spared, and he'd be allowed to take a bit of his fortune and walk away. Tesron was about to thank him when Logan cut him dead. He said that if his father, Patrick, had been standing there, he would have done exactly that. Patrick was a man of his word, a man who might even be decent enough to accept an unconditional surrender. While he was talking, Logan's eyes fell on a diamond-studded dagger, sitting in an open chest. He picked it up, admiring the insane craftsmanship. Tesron instantly told him to keep it, bragging that it was made by the best smiths in the entire kingdom. But Logan refused, telling Tesron to take it with him. And then, without a single warning, Logan plunged that dagger straight into Tesron's chest. As Tesron crumpled to the floor, he accused Logan of lying, screaming that he had promised to let him live. Logan just calmly replied that he never made that promise. He only described what his father would have done. But too bad for Tesron, Logan was nothing like his father. Tesron tried to mutter something about noble honor, but Logan cut him off, asking if he had any clue. How many people were dead because of his bottomless greed? He ordered him to end his filthy life right then and there. And with that, Tesron fell to the floor, dead. Staring down at the body, Logan thought that Tesron should be grateful he made it that quick. He clenched his blood-stained fist and let out a long breath. The nightmare was finally over. Now, all that was left was to clean up the mess. He yelled for all to hear that Viscount Raymond Tesron had taken his own life. That story would work just fine. A few moments later, Kaiselan walked in and told Logan he needed to see the castle's underground prison. A few days pass, and Logan is standing outside the castle walls with his father. Patrick told him he rushed over the second his injuries were healed. He then asked about Tesron taking his own life. Logan confirmed it, saying the guy must have been crushed by his defeat. Patrick wasn't buying it for a second. He stepped right up to his son and asked him point blank if he was the one who killed Tesron. The two locked eyes, the tension so thick, you'd think they were about to throw down. Finally, Logan admitted the truth. Yeah, he had eliminated Tesron, on purpose. He explained that sometimes you have to get your own hands dirty, and that letting Tesron's bloodline continue to exist was just begging for future catastrophes. Patrick gazed at his son for a heavy moment before hailing him as a true man now, certain that he must have had his reasons. He drove the point home, saying that regardless of what anyone else thought, Logan was the absolute MVP of this war, and offered his heartfelt gratitude. That simple praise sent a wave of joy through Logan, who looked at his father and broke into a wide, authentic smile. Patrick, with a faint blush and a slight stammer, praised his son's excellent work before dropping even bigger news. Logan was to be officially declared the heir of House McLean. Logan's smile only widened as he shook his head, flat out refusing. Patrick was completely floored and demanded an explanation. Was Logan worried about his reputation? Patrick swore that his incredible achievements in the war were more than enough to silence any haters. But Logan explained that wasn't the issue at all. He laid it out. Ronan was a far better fit to inherit the family. The McLeans were a lineage of knights, and Ronan had awakened his force at the young age of 14, a full 4 years sooner than Logan himself. There was no telling how monstrously powerful he could become as an adult. Patrick was left utterly speechless. He fired back that raw power alone doesn't decide who gets to lead a noble house. Logan conceded that was true in a normal world. But if Ronan managed to lock down the title of the continent's youngest force user, just as he did in the previous timeline, then not a single soul could object. More importantly, Logan had zero personal desire to become the Baron. He refused to have his time consumed by that role. As the older brother, Logan declared that he wanted to give Ronan the opportunity he rightfully deserved. He urged Patrick to put off choosing an heir until Ronan was of legal age. Patrick admitted he never dreamed that Logan cared so profoundly for his brother, but he honored the request. The succession would be put on hold for 5 years until Ronan officially became a man. Logan gave his father his thanks. Still, Patrick was adamant about giving him a different reward. They would head back to the mansion to tally up the spoils of war, a haul expected to top several 100,000 gold pieces. But judging by the look on Logan's face, he already had something else cooking. Out of nowhere, a guard's shout echoed, "Open the gates." The McLean Knights had returned. The townspeople swarmed the streets, murmuring in absolute disbelief. They couldn't wrap their heads around it. The army was back in barely a week, and the war was supposedly crushed in a single day. Two guys started debating it, one of them wondering out loud how something like that was even conceivable. He asked if the McLean Knights had always been this ridiculously powerful. The other guy lowered his voice to a whisper. He leaned in and asked if he'd caught the rumors that the entire victory was because of the young master, Logan McLean. He said that, according to the soldiers who got back first, Logan's mercenary squad completely flipped the script. They materialized behind the enemy, as if they had predicted every single move. Another guy chimed in that the enemy forces were obliterated by some strange, new weapon, and that Logan himself had personally taken down a high-ranking knight. A young woman asked if the young master had secretly been this incredible all along. Someone else shot back that he'd always pegged Logan as a good-for-nothing, just messing around, until now. Slowly, the pieces started clicking into place for the crowd. Maybe all that monster meat he'd bought wasn't so pointless after all. Maybe the kid had been cooking up a master plan this whole time. Some even whispered that Logan might have been faking it, acting the fool on purpose. That thought sent a chill down their spines. The praise started erupting, people saying geniuses are just built different, especially now that he was an awakened force user. Logan heard every single word and was dying from the second-hand embarrassment of hearing people gas him up like that. Ronan asked him how it felt to get so much love from the crowd. Logan awkwardly shot back that it was just making him cringe and told his brother to stop hyping him up. But Ronan wasn't having it. "No cap, it's not an exaggeration," he insisted. Every word was true, and he told Logan he should at least crack a smile for the people who were so damn happy to see him alive. After mulling it over for a second, Logan decided to give it a shot. He forced out what he thought was a heroic grin. In reality, he looked like someone desperately trying to hold in a massive dump while sprinting full speed towards the castle. To be honest, he looked like either a rich psycho like Rich McGee or Medusa herself. The instant the crowd saw Logan's smile, everyone just froze. They were all dead certain he was about to smash their skulls in with his bare hands. Logan, completely oblivious to what he'd just done, just stood there totally confused. Ronan could only feel a deep sense of pity for his hopeless brother. Patrick, however, turned to look at Logan with a face full of genuine pride. He then raised his voice, announcing that the next round of applause was dedicated to the true hero of the war, and with that, he declared the grand celebration had officially kicked off. Not long after, the scene changes to the castle gardens. Logan was just wandering through the courtyard, mind blown that a welcome party could rage all the way until dawn, especially for a group of people who had literally just returned from a battlefield. Of course, the moment of peace was short-lived. From right behind him, Marion suddenly screamed his name, demanding to know what the hell he thought he was pulling. Ronan immediately grabbed her arm. He tried to placate her, but Marion wasn't having it. She snapped that she'd heard everything, demanding to know if the rumors were true. Had Logan actually rejected the position of heir, and what was his real endgame? She accused him of manipulating everyone else, but warned him that she wasn't some fool he could play. Ronian jumped in, trying to de-escalate, explaining that Kairos's treachery had left Marion completely shattered. Logan just waved it off. It was fine. Glancing at Marion, he realized that despite all the bitterness she clung to, She was powerless now that Kairos had ditched her. She was no longer a real player in this game. Logan figured if he played his cards right, he might just be able to salvage this. He openly admitted, with total sincerity, that his actions over the last few months had been erratic and disgraceful. He confessed that even he was disgusted by what he'd done, all of it fueled by toxic jealousy and a crushing inferiority complex. Hearing this, Marion just screamed at Ronian, gloating that she'd been right the whole time. Logan was straight up admitting it was all a scheme. Ronian immediately shut her down, pleading with her to just stop. He apologized to Logan yet again, explaining that his mother was just not in her right mind. But Logan barely even registered Marion's outburst. Instead, his focus shifted to Ronian, telling him to listen up, because the one who truly deserved an apology here wasn't Marion. It was Ronian himself. Utterly bewildered, Ronian asked what he was talking about. Logan laid it all out. Ever since he came back, he'd been tossing around apologies without ever saying what they were for. The deep-seated regret and his own cowardice weren't easy things to confront. Ronian demanded to know what the hell he was talking about. So Logan finally unleashed the truth. He confessed that for years, he had secretly and bitterly despised his own brother. He admitted that he'd tried to mask his own inadequacies by projecting all his resentment onto Ronian. The memory of those pathetic years filled him with a profound shame. But now, he was genuinely sorry. He bowed low, a deep and formal gesture, and sincerely asked for his brother's forgiveness. Ronian just stared, completely silent. Logan, still bent in his bow, thought with a pang of bitterness that good intentions could never wash away the sins of the past. He knew he'd been a fool to expect anything different. But then, Ronian's voice cut through the silence. He said it was okay. The words hit Logan like a physical blow, freezing him in place. Ronian went on, explaining that he always believed if he just kept showing Logan kindness, even when his brother was being cold and cruel, eventually, the big brother he remembered from childhood would find his way back. And then he smiled at him. It was the kind of smile that could make a grown man break down and weep. An incredible warmth blossomed in Logan's chest. He couldn't believe he had wasted so many years running from something so simple. Facing Marion again, Logan told her with unwavering sincerity that he truly loved Ronian and wanted nothing more than to see his brother become the next head of the family. He acknowledged that asking her to trust him immediately was a big ask, so he told her to just watch him. From this day forward, every move he made would be for the good of their house. As Marion finally turned and walked away, Logan thought to himself that for now, this was the best he could do. This apology had to be enough. The very next morning, deep within a dense forest, Logan and Hamar hiked through the undergrowth. Hamar was grumbling, wanting to know where on earth they were going so soon after a brutal war. Logan just replied coolly that he'd had plenty of rest, and it was time to get back to work. Hamar just grumbled to himself that Logan was only hyped because of the mission they were on, fantasizing about how he was finally going to cash in on some serious rewards this time. Logan shot him a confident look, promising that this particular job was going to be an absolute blast. Hamar was skeptical, convinced Logan had no clue what he was getting them into. Moments later, they emerged into a wide clearing and looked out at the landscape. What Hamar saw made him freeze in his tracks. It turned out Logan's grand plan was to start a mining operation. Back when they were discussing the Tesron barony, Patrick had revealed what Logan had asked for as his spoils of war. He didn't want titles or treasure. Logan had simply requested the exploration rights to a hill near the Tesron border. Patrick had literally laughed, saying that calling it a hill was generous. The place was a desolate, barren wasteland with nothing of value on it. He pressed Logan, asking why he was so fixated on that worthless patch of dirt. Logan had just smirked and cryptically replied that there might be gold hiding under the surface. The full story behind Tesron's surprise invasion wouldn't come to light for another year. As it turned out, Tesron had been secretly smuggling gold out of a mine on that very hill, which was located on what used to be McLean land that he'd illegally seized. That one mine had single-handedly catapulted Tesron's house way above the level of a typical Count's family. Their wealth flowed until Ronian eventually annihilated their entire bloodline as an act of vengeance. Rewind to the Tesron barony's dungeon, where Kaisalan had mentioned there were a few unusual prisoners worth checking out. One of them swore he was innocent of any crime. He claimed he had just taken a job from the Count to haul gold from the mine they'd been contracted to work. But for some reason, the Viscount had thrown them all in prison. Logan just pressed a hand to his face, absolutely floored by Tesron's sheer stupidity. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that the man had jailed 5 master miners, the kind of experts you could build an entire empire on. One of the prisoners, voice trembling, dared to ask if Logan was pissed off for them. The truth? Logan's merchant brain was firing on all cylinders. He wasn't seeing a tragedy. He was staring at a straight-up gold mine that had literally just landed in his lap. The old prisoner's eyes narrowed, sizing Logan up, trying to figure out what his whole deal was. But inside Logan's head, the war with Tesron was just a ripple. the real tsunami was still on the horizon. In 1 year, King Samuel Grandia was going to die unexpectedly. That single moment would ignite a vicious power struggle between his 3 sons, catapulting the kingdom into a bloody 3-year civil war and gutting its military might. And before they could even begin to rebuild, the empire would launch its full-scale invasion. That 1-2 punch was destined to completely annihilate the kingdom. Since the MacLeans were playing neutral, with no political ties, they were on track to become nothing more than helpless spectators at their own execution. But where others saw doom, Logan saw an opening, and he wasn't about to let it pass. He planned to weaponize the chaos, reclaim his family's lost lands, and re-establish them as the undisputed rulers of the Southwest. And if the stars aligned, he'd even put a stop to the Civil War itself, and set his sights on an even greater prize. Just as his mind was spiraling with these grand ambitions, Hamar's voice cut through. "Yo, did you call me over just to watch you space out?" Logan snapped back to the present, realizing he'd been lost in the future. They had barely survived one catastrophe. For now, his only mission was to build up his power base as quickly as possible. Voicing his real dreams out loud would just make him sound insane. No matter what, he was on the hook to fund this entire operation himself. And that barren, worthless hill, that was about to become the golden goose that would finance his entire future. Logan gathered his men and dropped the bombshell. There was gold buried deep inside that hill. He announced his plan to start digging and open a mine, then asked them for a price tag. The crew was struck speechless. Hamar just chalked it up to another one of Logan's unhinged ideas. The old supervisor, still feeling generous from Tesron's payout, immediately agreed to an inspection, but a full-blown gold mine felt like total overkill. He cautiously asked Logan, "Are you absolutely positive there's gold in there?" Logan just nodded. "I've seen it with my own 2 eyes." The old man was baffled. "How is that even possible?" "It was part of a Black Ops mission," Logan replied coolly. "And for security reasons, only the 6 of us here will be involved in the drilling." Hearing this, the old man's stomach clenched. His first thought was that Logan planned to get rid of them once the job was done. He protested, arguing that 6 men could never handle that kind of work, accusing Logan of being delusional. He almost blurted out that it would be impossible even with a dwarf on the team, but he caught himself and sent a silent prayer that Hamar was somehow up to the task. Hamar locked gazes with Logan and stated flatly, "If I do this, you better be ready to work yourself to death, forget what sleep feels like, and give up on any chance of a normal life." Seeing that dead serious expression, the old supervisor felt his soul leave his body. Logan, however, was totally satisfied. That was Hamar for you, a true master craftsman through and through. "All right then," Logan declared. "It looks like both you and the old man are on board. So, let's talk numbers." The old man stepped in to explain. He said they'd first need to drill test shafts just to estimate the size of the deposit, but the initial investment alone would demand 5 million gold pieces. Hamar added that developing the mine safely would be a long, slow grind. The prep phase would take 6 months, followed by another 6 months to get to full-scale extraction. Logan nodded. It was exactly the timeline he had anticipated. A huge cost and a massive delay. But this one mine had made the Tesron family wealthier than most counts. He had to grab this opportunity. He grumbled internally that if he could just sell the monster meat he had, he'd already have the funding secured. But its true effects wouldn't be recognized for at least another 6 months. And then, an idea struck him like lightning. Maybe he didn't have to wait. What if he could neutralize the toxins in the monster meat? He could sell it as a powerful medicine right now. After all, he'd detoxified more poisons than he could count during his mercenary days. Whipping up an antidote should be totally possible. If he could perfect the formula and get it to market, he wouldn't just be rich, he'd be loaded. A week later, in the McLean village, out in the southwest, Rick showed up carrying the concoction Logan had ordered, made from crushed night herb, web herbs, and drip grass. "Don't call it a fake medicine," Logan corrected him instantly. "It's a neutralizing agent. Now, where did you store the monster meat?" Rick told him it was all piled up in the village warehouse, exactly as Logan had instructed. "Perfect," Logan said. "We're going to apply this directly to the meat." Rick went pale. "Wait, you actually expect me to go in there with you?" Logan shot back. "Of course you are," but Rick looked terrified, warning him, "I've never been inside. I have no idea what kind of abomination is waiting for us in there." Logan was getting annoyed by the drama. Why was Rick being so extra? And then it hit him. The reek. The moment they even got close to the warehouse, a wave of stench so powerful hit them that a public sewer would smell like a rose garden. In comparison, Logan had to admit, he knew it would be bad, but this was potent enough to make him want to hurl. Rick was already losing his lunch right there on the ground. Fortunately, Logan had a trump card. He simply used his aura to completely block his own sense of smell. With the area sealed tight, Logan coolly prepared to enter and told Rick, "It's showtime." Rick's jaw dropped, watching Logan stroll inside completely unfazed, while he himself was about to collapse from the stench. When he stammered out how Logan could possibly stand it, Logan revealed he'd used force to temporarily shut down his own sense of smell. Rick grumbled about how unfair that was, but Logan shot back that if he had a problem with it, he should just awaken his own force and solve it. Logan then tossed Rick a pouch filled with a white powder, a neutralizer, and instructed him to sprinkle it all over the meat. He warned him to use enough to make the entire outer layer white, because any leftover black parts were still dangerously toxic. Those bits needed to be handled with extreme care. After that, Rick had to mince everything into a fine paste and roll it into tiny balls. Once a sample was ready, Logan held it up and asked if it looked like legit medicine. Rick had to admit, it really did. That's when Logan revealed the plan. They were going to market it as a remedy, and since Rick would be in charge of production, he needed to lock in every detail. He had to memorize every single step. Rick immediately freaked out, insisting there was no way he was going to be part of a shady scheme like that. Logan just shrugged, casually adding that he'd pay 100 gold coins for every pill Rick produced. Rick's morals did a complete 180. Logan, however, was silently kicking himself, realizing he probably could have just bullied him into doing it for free. "All right, next up," Logan announced. "We need to test if this stuff actually works." Rick eyed the concoction suspiciously. "So, what's this supposed to do?" Logan shot him a sly grin. "It's a performance enhancer. For guys." But Rick just stared back, the gears in his head grinding to a halt. "Nothing." Logan let out an exhausted sigh. "All right, look, I'm explaining this one time, so you better use that brain of yours. Let's talk about the birds and the bees. But with rabbits. You got a boy rabbit, and you got a girl rabbit." The male rabbit was super depressed and bummed out because he couldn't, move his little foot properly inside the pot. So, the female rabbit mixed him up a special tea to boost his confidence. After drinking it, the little guy turned into an absolute super rabbit. His little foot suddenly grew to 4 times its normal size, letting him stir that pot with unbelievable power. After finishing his weird-ass story, Logan asked Rick if he got the picture. Rick's head nodded frantically. Oh, he got it. In fact, he already had the perfect guinea pig in mind. This got Logan's attention, and he asked who the lucky guy was. Without missing a beat, Rick announced it was Mr. Dwayne. A short while later, a knock landed on Logan's office door, followed by a calm, "Come in." Dwayne poked his head in, apologizing for the intrusion, and saying he heard Logan was looking for him. But when he stepped inside, the room was empty. Suddenly, Logan materialized right behind him like a vampire stepping out of the shadows, scaring the soul out of the poor man. Dwayne launched himself backward like a pro athlete, clutching his chest and nearly having a heart attack right there on the floor. He yelled at Logan for creeping up on people like that, but Logan just casually walked over, saying he only wanted to give his shoulders a massage. He mentioned how hard Dwayne had been working to manage everything after the war. Dwayne just brushed it off, saying he was fine. He insisted Lord McLean was the one who was really struggling. Logan even added that his own father had fainted from being so overworked, but Dwayne snapped that the only reason he fainted was because Logan had jump-scared him earlier. Logan just nodded, sympathizing with how tough things had been. They'd burned through every last coin for the war effort, a fact the servants and knights were still blissfully unaware of. People were constantly bugging him for money, driving the whole admin team crazy. Dwayne said he must have had Logan all wrong. He never imagined Logan would care so much about the administrator's problems, but he never got to finish that thought, because Logan cut him right off. He leaned in and asked if all that stress was the reason he was having performance issues. Dwayne froze solid. The color drained from his face as he made a desperate bolt for the door to escape. Logan calmly told him to at least hear him out. He pressed the medicine into Dwayne's palm, explaining that it was a brand new product from Philip Kyle's merchant company. He promised it had guaranteed results after just 1 pill, though he privately admitted to himself that this was, in fact, the very first field test. Dwayne hesitated, stared at the pill, and then, in a moment of desperation, swallowed it. A short time later, he was seen absolutely tearing down the castle halls. He was at a full sprint, screaming Logan and Rick's names. The two turned around as Rick heard the crazed shouting, while Logan already knew exactly what was up. Dwayne had come back for more. Rick tried to chew him out for running inside, but Dwayne blew right past him. He skidded to a halt in front of Logan, demanding to know how much he wanted for the pills. The dude looked ready to commit murder for them. Seeing this, a predatory grin spread across Logan's face as he declared his new product a massive success. Rick just fumed about being ignored yet again. Meanwhile, Logan simply told Dwayne to hold out his hand. Panting, drenched in sweat, and barely able to stay upright, Dwayne dropped to his knees before Logan. The whole scene looked less like a business deal and more like a frantic marriage proposal, with Logan standing over him like he was about to accept. While Rick stared in utter disbelief, Logan handed Dwayne a wooden box packed with pills. Dwayne took it like it was a sacred relic. It turned out that after that first successful test, men started lining up to bow before him, and the experiments continued. They repeated this process several more times. Flash forward a bit, and we find Logan in his office, now in a meeting with Hankley. Logan casually drops that he's heard some tea about Hankley and his wife having knockdown, drag-out fights every single night. Hankley immediately scoffs at the idea, demanding to know who's out there spreading that kind of garbage. But before another word can escape his lips, Logan orders him to zip it and forces a pill straight down his throat. And just like that, Hankley was officially guinea pig number 2. He swallows, and the pill's magic hits him like a freight train. He pivots toward the door, looking like he's about to protest, but Logan cuts him off cold, telling him to get to his wife now and promising to smooth things over with his father. At those words, a massive, grateful grin erupts on Hankley's face. He stammers out a thank you and then blasts out of the room with the force of a hurricane, obviously rocketing towards what was destined to be a legendary night. Later, the scene cuts to Patrick, sitting in his office. He'd been the 3rd test subject, and judging by the blissed-out look on his face, he was over the moon with the results. Glancing toward his dad's bedroom, Logan mused to himself that he almost felt a little bad for Ronian. At this rate, his brother was on the fast track to getting another younger sibling, meaning Logan wouldn't be the baby of the family anymore. Watching this absolute chaos unfold, Rick finally snaps, angrily demanding to know why Logan never let him try the pill. I mean, come on, he was the one who put in the most sweat equity on this whole project. Logan just hits him with a blank stare, his eyes flick down to Rick's lower region, and then he just turns his back and starts walking away. Rick screams after him, asking what in the world that shady look was supposed to be about. Logan halts without turning and replies that Rick would never get the opportunity to use the pill in the first place, so giving it to him would be a complete waste. He even tells the guy to get lost because he smells. Yeah, at this point it was painfully obvious Logan was living for the drama of torturing this poor guy. A bit later, we see Logan on a call with Philip through a magic orb. Philip concedes that if the potion is as legit as Logan claims, the demand for it would be off the charts. He asks what kind of price Logan is planning to set. Logan coolly replies that it's 100 gold a pop and 10,000 gold for a box of 10. Philip balks at the insane price tag and asks if Logan genuinely thinks the nobles in the capital are complete morons, warning him that he could land in serious hot water for price gouging like that. But Logan just says with total confidence that they are far from foolish. In his previous life, this very medicine was such a runaway success that its price tag shot into the stratosphere. He insists that if Philip just trickles out a limited supply at the start, the product will fetch an even higher price. Philip listens intently, admits the logic is sound, and forks over the gold for another 10 minutes of call time. Logan continues, explaining that the potion's popularity would absolutely explode if a celebrity user vouched for it, someone super famous, who, actually needs that sort of performance boost. Philip is dumbfounded, arguing that no self-respecting noble would ever publicly announce that his little problem was fixed by a magic pill. Logan shoots back that they don't need some big official announcement. He says so many eyes are glued to the nobles 24/7 that even the faintest whisper of a rumor would spread, like wildfire, and everyone would come swarming like bees to a honeypot. Hearing this, a light bulb flashes over Philip's head, and he proposes that Logan should crash one of the capital's high society parties. Logan flips out, asking if Philip has completely lost his marbles. The only parties he'd ever crashed were booze-soaked mercenary blowouts after a battle, and his family was way too broke for a proper, noble shindig. Philip insists that these parties are the ultimate networking events, even for making business deals. He admits it's a long game, and Logan obviously couldn't just start slinging pills on the dance floor, but the concept ignites a spark in Logan's strategic mind. Philip instantly catches on, asking if Logan is seriously considering a move that reckless, warning him that his family would be completely cancelled by high society. Logan just shrugs it off, saying nothing of the sort would happen as long as no actual sales go down there. He then tells Philip about a legendary informant operating in the capital and asks him to track the guy down and scrape together all the intel he's going to need. Philip hesitates, asking what informant he could possibly be talking about and what kind of insane scheme he's cooking up this time. Logan just says that he's heading to the city of Gran pretty soon, and he'll spill all the details once he's there. That response gives Philip a very, very bad feeling. 1 week later, Logan strolls into Gran, the capital city of the Grandia Kingdom. Philip stares at him, totally shook that the madman actually came, and asks how on earth he got his family to sign off on this. The son of a noble house waltzing into the capital to peddle performance enhancers wasn't exactly a common sight. Logan assures him that he hadn't told his family the whole story, although hauling 3,000 boxes without a single servant to help was proving to be a serious pain in the neck. He reflects that his father had agreed, way more easily than he'd anticipated, likely because of all the major wins he'd stacked up during the war. Philip notes that, come to think of it, Logan was flying solo without a servant the first time they met, too. He asks if that's even a thing a noble is allowed to do. To be seen rolling with an entourage like that, Logan just scoffed, saying servants only get in the way, not to mention, they've got their own duties to handle. His thoughts drifted to Rick and the colossal task he'd burdened him with. He mused that even though he'd been harsh on Rick in this life and the last, the guy had always been ride or die for him, and for that, he was deeply grateful. A vision of Rick materialized in his mind. That one time he'd swiped a handful of pills. Annoyed, Logan had laid down the law. If he shook him, and even one pill fell out, Rick would catch a fist for every single one. That, he decided, was just tough love. A wicked grin then spread across Logan's face as a brilliant idea struck him. "I've made my decision," he announced suddenly. To immortalize all of Rick's hard work, he proclaimed he would name the new medicine Emporic the most fitting way to cement a man's legacy. After all, what could be better than naming an impotence pill after him? Philip didn't even question it anymore. The verdict was in. Logan was completely unhinged. Back inside their dorm, Philip noted that Logan must be totally wiped from his travels, and suggested that a trip to a bar might be the perfect way to recover. Logan instantly shot back that Philip needed to watch his mouth. When discussing a man who couldn't get it up in a place crawling with eavesdroppers, Philip quickly conceded, saying, this environment was way better for hashing out such delicate matters. He then switched gears, mentioning that he'd already linked up with their informant and double-checked if Logan was dead set on paying 900 gold for each document. Logan admitted the guy's prices were criminal, but his confidence was off the charts. He explained that as long as their requests were laser-focused, the intel they'd get back would be flawless. Philip assured him he had followed the instructions to the letter. The first file detailed every noble who had been married for the past 10 years, but was still shooting blanks. The second contained a list of nobles without a single mistress or second wife, and the third was a catalog of nobles constantly buying food known to boost one's stamina. Hearing the breakdown, Logan's lips curled into a smile. Perfect. We are officially in business. He gave Philip a nod of approval, telling him he did an amazing job, not just on this mission, but with every single thing he'd asked him to manage in the capital. Philip shrugged it off, saying it wasn't so tough, and that the real emergency was the day the news about the war broke. He told Logan he couldn't possibly fathom how worried he'd been, especially when he heard the conflict had ended that very same night. Logan, who had been laser-focused on a piece of paper, felt a flicker of warmth, realizing Philip actually cared about his clients. That feeling, however, vanished in an instant, because Philip immediately launched into a complaint about the gigantic pile of monster meat he was now stuck with. It just kills my appetite, he whined. Seriously, what kind of maniac would ever buy that garbage? Without missing a beat, Logan hurled the paper straight at Philip's face. Shut your mouth and read this. As the sheet smacked into him, Philip wondered why a simple piece of paper could sting so much. He started to scan the words, as Logan casually asked which name on the list looked like their best first customer. A single tear escaped from Philip's right eye, as his gaze locked onto something on the page. Seeing that stark reaction, Logan watched him intently, waiting for him to speak. Philip's finger trembled as he pointed to one of the names. What? What about this person? He stammered. Logan followed his gaze, and his face instantly drained of all color. It was a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He knew that name. Sometime later, inside a grand ballroom shimmering under a massive chandelier, the elite were sipping champagne. A hulking man stood out from the sea of people, rocking a crimson jacket and sharp black trousers as he held court with a group of beautiful women. That man was Count Davis, and his name was the one Logan's voice boomed across the hall, demanding his attention. The Count whipped around, his face a mask of disbelief, quickly twisting into a snarl of disgust mixed with a hint of fear. Logan strode toward him and made his introduction. Logan McLean. Eldest son of House McLean, Count Davis fought to keep his composure, barely suppressing a condescending laugh, as he welcomed his new guest to the party. He gave Logan a slow, deliberate once-over, his eyes lingering on his tacky clothes. He snidely wondered what kind of farm the boy had crawled out of, assuming this must be the height of fashion in the Southwest. Logan privately thought about how Philip had recommended this exact outfit, and just as he'd hoped, nobody liked it. He concluded that this look was, in fact, the perfect choice. He wasn't here to make pointless connections at a meaningless party. His only objective was Count Davis. Davis, the fallen noble. Despite being a huge deal in the Grandia Kingdom's treasury, and having been married since he was 20, he remained completely childless. Logan was floored when Philip pointed him out on the list because, in his previous life, Davis had become a household name not for anything good, but for being the Count, who ended his own life over his wife. A memory flashed a vicious argument from the past, his wife's piercing scream echoing in his mind, at a party, straight up blasting him as an impotent bastard in front of the entire crowd. That, one single public takedown, was enough to make him end his own life. Logan knew that in this world, reputation and clout were everything, and Davis hit all three conditions on his list. The guy was practically the perfect test subject for Emporic. Logan approached the Count, cool as ever, saying he was in the capital on a business trip and had heard tales of his influence, so he just had to pay his respects. The Count scoffed, asking what kind of business some nobody like Logan could possibly be running, in a city that was already overflowing with everything imaginable. He snidely added that since Logan was from the sticks, he must be peddling some kind of weird rural trinket that the capital had never seen. Logan just smiled back, promising that the product he was pushing was something they definitely didn't have here, which was the entire point of his visit. He called it a specialized medicine just for men. Leaning in close to Davis's ear, he dropped a single, quiet word: stimulant. Hearing that, the Count went rigid, chewing on his lip for a second before exploding, shouting for everyone to hear how a nobleman's son could possibly have the nerve to sell stimulants. Two girls nearby just watched the train wreck, cringing hard. The Count figured this country bumpkin had some serious audacity trying to act like a big shot in the capital, and from the look on Logan's face, he thought he'd put him right back in his place. Logan just heaved a deep sigh and geared up for his next move. He told Davis that as a gesture of goodwill, he'd brought a small gift for the city's elite and politely asked him to take it. He slid a small box to the man, telling him it was called Emporic and explaining that a single pill would typically run for 100 gold coins. He then revealed that he'd brought these 3 pills specifically for the Count, on the house, and swore it was a miracle drug with 0 side effects, staking his entire honor as a noble on the line. Davis took it all in, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. A few days zip by, and there's a ring at Logan's doorbell. It's a servant from Count Davis, sent with one mission: to buy more Emporic. The servant gave a polite bow, confirmed he was the Count's man, and eventually walked away with a whole briefcase. With Philip seeing him off, thanking him for his business, and telling him to swing by any time, Philip strolled back into the room and started counting out the cash for Logan. They'd pulled in 10,000 gold from just 10 boxes, and Philip remarked that it was a pretty solid start. Logan, though, looked completely unimpressed. He shot back that they needed to do way better than that, because the rent on their tiny storefront alone was 10,000 gold. Philip argued that this was just the price of doing business in the absolute center of the capital, and Logan had no clue what a nightmare it was to even lock down the location. He explained that, from a strategic standpoint, the physical shop was crucial, because having people actually see a crowd gathering creates a way bigger psychological effect. Logan had to agree, and then announced he was bouncing to go to another party. Philip let out a massive groan, whining about how he'd been dragged to a party almost every single day since they'd rolled into Gran, and some days, he even had to suffer through 2 of them. Logan laid it out straight. Landing Count Davis as their first whale wasn't enough. He had to get the word out and hype up the store to every single person on their target list. 1 week later, Count Davis's servant was trudging through the streets, still mind-blown that the Count had sent him to buy that medicine again, especially after seeing countless so-called health remedies fail him before. But when he finally got to the shop, he was absolutely floored. A gigantic line of men snaked all the way down the street, every single one of them waiting to buy the exact same stuff. He scanned the crowd, wondering what the hell was going on, until it hit him like a ton of bricks. He knew these faces, every single one of them. That guy was Viscount Talon's Chamberlain, and the dude right in front of him was Count Hamel's personal butler. He quickly tugged his hat down, trying to hide his face as much as possible, knowing this was the kind of thing that would spark some serious gossip. He figured he should just grab the goods and get out of there. The second he did, Philip stepped out of the shop to make an announcement. He apologized to the massive crowd, informing them that, unfortunately, today's entire stock was already sold out. At those words, the servants waiting in line for their masters absolutely lost it. One of them marched right up to Philip, demanding to know what he meant by sold out since nobody had said a word about it before. Philip just apologized again, explaining that Emporic's popularity had exploded, but production was struggling to keep pace, so they were forced to limit sales to 50 boxes per day. 2 guys instantly got desperate and started begging Philip to sell them some, pleading that their masters would have their heads if they dared to come back with nothing. While this whole mess was unfolding, another noble's carriage happened to pass by and saw the commotion. Intrigued, he immediately dispatched his own servant to investigate, and lurking just around a nearby corner, Logan watched the whole chaotic scene with a cold, satisfied grin. He knew that by choking the supply, he'd make his customers even more desperate to get their hands on it, and the spectacle of the crowd itself would trigger the curiosity of every other noble in the city. Everything was falling perfectly into place, exactly as he'd designed. Philip's voice echoed across the street, shouting for all to hear that the day's supply was gone and that they should all try their luck again tomorrow. The second day, a complete sellout. The third day was an exact repeat, leaving the city's nobles absolutely reeling, wondering how many more days this frenzy would last. Logan marveled that it was just unreal. explaining that their daily sales had been explosive for more than a month, and that day, they had sold every last item the very second they unlocked the doors. He realized that at this clip, pocketing 4.5 million gold in 1 month might actually be on the table. Hearing this, Logan shot back a sarcastic question, asking who on earth knew the capital was so full of nobles who couldn't perform in the bedroom. He pointed out that they'd already jacked up the price by 3 times since the middle of the year, yet customers were still practically begging to pay more. It almost made him genuinely anxious about the kingdom's future. After voicing his concern, he gave Philip a dead serious stare. And then, in a flash, his face cracked into a deranged grin, like a predator who had just cornered its prey. A booming laugh erupted from his chest, echoing so loudly out of the shop that it made people on the street whip their heads around. In the end, he was just deliriously happy. He grabbed Philip in a headlock and started aggressively messing up his hair. He roared that Philip was a magnificent little brat and commended him for pulling it off so perfectly. Philip, meanwhile, was turning a shade of purple from the lack of oxygen. He managed a deep bow and thanked Logan for everything he'd done. Logan glanced down at him, satisfied, and said it was good that Philip understood his own value. And as a reward, starting the following week, he would be getting 1% of the gross sales as his own commission. Philip completely lost it, screaming that he'd give it his absolute all before lunging forward to try and plant a kiss on Logan. All of this unfolded under the watchful eye of a shadowy figure across the street, his wrinkled face concealed by a hood, his beard a flash of gold in the afternoon light. Sometime later, from the back room of a sorcery shop, Logan was on a communication line when he suddenly bellowed. He shouted that it would be a minimum of 10 tons of gold every year, a statement so shocking it caused everyone else in the shop to snap their attention toward him. He froze mid-word, his eyes locked on the doorway, before demanding to know if the person on the other end was being serious. On the other side of the call was Hammer, who coolly confirmed that the intel was solid. Hammer elaborated that the miners were reporting a massive probability that the gold nuggets were concentrated in a much deeper stratum of the hill. Logan stared into the communication orb like a man possessed, his teeth gritted, and his fists clenched so tightly they were visibly shaking. Even a conservative estimate put 10 tons of gold at a value of around 100 million gold coins. To him, this was the ultimate score, a lottery win so massive it defied imagination. Hammer soberly added that the mining expenses were no joke, asking if Logan could truly front the cash, since the startup costs alone would be about 5 million gold. Logan confidently assured Hammer that he had it covered and just told him to stand by. He promised he would round up all the necessary funds and manpower with extreme speed. Hammer seemed unfazed and simply told Logan to take it easy on the hired help. Later, walking through the city streets in the dead of night, Logan mulled over the 5 million gold initial investment needed for the mine. If he maintained his current sales velocity, he was pulling in roughly 4.5 million gold each month. He realized that even if he only sold his products for 2 more months, he would have more than enough cash, especially since he had a reserve of about 700 medicine boxes. He began to consider a trip back home to restock his inventory and finally kick off the mental development project. But a sudden flicker of movement shattered his concentration, snapping him out of his thoughts. Logan's eyes darted toward a nearby shop, his senses screaming that someone was inside. In a heartbeat, he was moving. Assuming it was a break-in, he delivered a savage kick to the door, blasting it off its hinges and sending it crashing against the interior wall. He swept through the premises, scanning every corner, but the shop appeared completely deserted. Logan unsheathed his sword. He wondered if the intruders had somehow dematerialized, but then remembered there was only one exit. They had to still be in here. The instant that thought formed, a dark shape blurred past him. He reacted instantly, swinging his blade at the cloaked intruder, but his sword cut through nothing but air. He missed. "Who's there?" he yelled. He spun around to find the room completely empty. He stood frozen, sword extended at nothing, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was impossible, he thought. He was 100% certain he had felt a presence. And then, he felt it again. He looked up, his instincts telling him the thief was on the roof. Without a moment's hesitation, he launched himself upward, rocketing toward the cloaked figure. He raised his sword, preparing to strike, but the culprit shifted at the very last second. Logan landed on the rooftop, facing the intruder with his sword ready. He demanded to know the man's identity. He received no response. Instead, the figure simply dissolved into thin air, leaving no trace behind. Logan was utterly dumbfounded by what he had just witnessed. He couldn't wrap his head around it. There had been no sign of an aura, not even a whisper of a presence, even when the man was right in his face. A moment later, he glanced down at his own hand and saw that he was clutching a torn piece of the man's cloak. He stared at the fabric, still trying to figure out what in the hell had just transpired. Logan recounted the entire bizarre incident to Philip the next morning, and they both arrived at the same unsettling conclusion. An aura user had paid them a visit, had smashed their way into the shop. Logan theorized that whoever it was, they were at least an advanced force user, a term reserved for warriors who eclipse even high-rank knights. He stressed that this wasn't just a gut feeling. This intruder wasn't just elite. They were on another tier entirely. Philip was totally floored that someone who could channel aura was stooping to petty theft. The power of aura could elevate a slave to nobility, so he just couldn't wrap his head around why a master like that would be skulking around stealing things. He demanded to know what the thief had swiped. Logan confirmed. It was exactly what Philip was dreading. The thief had snatched only 2 pills of the medicine, empiric. That was it. Hearing this, Logan figured that if they only snagged 2 pills, it was never about the cash. They took it for personal use. Philip then questioned if it was possible for aura users to be impotent, too. A light bulb went off over Logan's head, and he instantly agreed. Logan then asked if his informant's list had any aura users on it, but Philip admitted it didn't. The informant wanted a fat extra fee for that kind of top-secret intel, and Philip had shot it down. But after racking his brain, Philip said one person did spring to mind, an aura wielder in the capital who remained without an heir. Cut to a brawny, impeccably dressed nobleman with blonde hair and a thick beard, strolling through the city with his wife as they watch children play. His expression is gentle, but his pale blue eyes are swimming with a deep longing as he gazes at them. He's jolted back to reality. When his wife asks what's captured his attention, he whips around, telling her he was just admiring the scenery, a nervous sweat beading on his brow. She doesn't buy that weak excuse for a second and calls him out, asking if he was staring at the children again. He desperately tries to sell her on the idea he was just enjoying the view, not thinking about anything crazy. He pulls his wife into a hug, saying they should head home. She sidesteps his suggestion, instead telling him that meeting him made her happier than anything, and asked if he knew that. The man's eyes fill with warmth, a faint smile playing under his mustache. He pulls her in for an even tighter embrace, and confesses he feels the exact same way. This man is Felix Esperanza, the single greatest swordsman in the entire kingdom. As it turns out, the profound sorrow and regret weighing on his soul began with a devastating blow he suffered in his youth while fighting for his country. He'd been horribly wounded right between his legs. Back then, it was just seen as a knight's scar of honor, a battle wound, and being so young, he didn't grasp the full gravity of it. But as the years passed, Felix couldn't stop wondering what the hell was the point of his ducal title, or being celebrated as the nation's strongest warrior, if he had no son to inherit his legacy. It all felt hollow. A flashback surfaces, showing Felix confessing his condition to his wife. Her reaction was so deeply understanding, it left him utterly stunned. She saw the immense pain he must have endured, and with tears welling in her eyes, she asked if he was truly okay with it, vowing to stand by his side and serve him for the rest of her days. Witnessing her grace, Felix was crushed, wondering how he could ever repay such boundless love. Later, we see Felix taking a walk through the castle gardens with one of his attendants. The servant gently warns him that the family meeting is starting soon, and asks if he's sure he shouldn't pick up the pace. Felix scoffs, saying that showing up early is pointless when all they're going to do is hound him about producing an heir. The servant pauses, then delicately brings up a rumor about a new, incredibly effective medicine that's been making the rounds in the capital. Hearing this, Felix fires back with a sarcastic, "Oh, is that so?" The servant presses on, claiming that supposedly, this miracle drug can even heal physical damage, but Felix remains completely dismissive. The servant insists, saying he knows. Felix is a skeptic, but that the reports of people getting mind-blowing results are piling up. At this, Felix bows his head, drowning in the shame of knowing he'd already tried that medicine, and worse, that he'd stolen it. His wife's tear-streaked face haunted him, yet he couldn't believe he had sunk to the level of a common thief, betraying the very discipline he lived by. And the most humiliating part? After he took the medicine, absolutely nothing changed. So he snaps at his servant, Louise, telling him not to be so gullible. He starts a desperate internal monologue, convincing himself he's right that the stories were just bogus rumors. There was no way some pill could fix what even aura couldn't heal. He told himself he should have just given up a long time ago. At the gates of the Duke's estate, Logan is facing off with a guard, who's telling him he can't see Felix without an official appointment. Logan, cool as a cucumber, tells the guard to just announce his name. He was dead certain that the second Felix knew who was at his door, he'd demand a meeting. Rewind to earlier, with Logan and Philip hashing this out. Philip was gobsmacked, asking if Logan was actually going to visit the Duke himself. Logan just gave a firm nod, and Philip started mocking him, asking if he was about to roll up on the most dangerous man in the kingdom, just to ask if he was a thief and if his junk was broken. Philip was absolutely losing his mind, asking if Logan was for real. But Logan, completely unfazed, just deadpans, asking if Philip is doing an impression of him. Philip begs him to just let it go, warning him he's about to stir up a hornet's nest for no reason. Philip's warning echoed in his mind. If this went sideways, they were completely cooked. Slumped in a chair out in the hall, Logan knew his friend had a point. But if that dude from the other day was legitimately the Sword Duke, this was a golden opportunity he couldn't afford to waste. Just then, a butler emerged from a nearby room. Pulling open a stunning, hand-carved door, the butler gestured for Logan to come in. There, silhouetted by the window, stood Felix. As Logan closed the distance to the legendary Sword Duke, he realized this was his one shot to get in good with one of the most powerful figures in the entire kingdom. He offered a respectful greeting, announcing himself as Logan, the eldest heir of the McLean household. But as Logan got a closer look at Felix, he noticed something was off. The man was supposedly around 70, but he didn't look a day over 40. Logan instantly clocked it. He was using his immense aura to literally defy the aging process. Felix acknowledged that the McLean territory was down in the southwest, then cut to the chase. What was Logan doing so far from home? Deciding not to play his full hand just yet, Logan claimed he'd just launched a new enterprise in the capital and brought a few items as a gesture of goodwill. He pushed a small box across the table, explaining it was a virility tonic with a glowing track record among countless aristocrats. Felix eyed the container, his face a perfect mask. "Is that so?" he asked, giving zero indication that he already knew exactly what it was. Keeping his head slightly lowered, Logan was now totally spiraling. Was this powerhouse really the same thief from yesterday, or not? He decided to press his luck. He pivoted, saying that a transcendent being like Felix would have no use for such a common remedy, which is why he'd brought something far more exclusive. At last, a crack appeared in Felix's stoic facade, a flicker of a reaction. A wave of relief washed over Logan. It all clicked. Felix wasn't unimpressed because the product was bad. He was unimpressed because he felt absolutely no effects from it when he'd used it before.